From a French pastel company making 2,000 colors to a type of salt in India that's produced using 1,000 degrees Celsius flames, we travel the world to see 14 traditions and businesses that have survived against all odds.
Break open this grey sphere and you'll reveal one of India's most popular salts. It's called black salt or kala namak. Centuries ago, it was used as medicine for digestion. Today, the salt is a staple in South Asian cuisine, known for its unique eggy and umami taste. Workers risk burning their skin on a nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius kiln and spend hours inhaling smoke to make it the traditional way. But the long and dangerous process has pushed people away from the craft. Chetak is one of the last factories making kala namak this way. But it's on the brink of shutting down. We went to Lucknow in India to see how this black salt is made and how, despite the challenges, this factory is still standing. Even though it's hard to make, kala namak is still massively popular in South Asian cuisine. And it's even finding a home in spice blends made in the United States. But as workers prepare to cook kala namak, they have to fire the kiln up to dangerously hot temperatures. The high heat damages the kiln over time, so they have to rebuild it every year. They fill the kiln with cow dung, which works as fuel for the fire. The Chetak black salt factory goes through 5,000 pieces of it every week. Workers pour in a layer of coal and use burning bicycle tires to set everything on fire. Sometimes they use diesel, but it's more expensive. On the other side of the factory, workers prepare the pots. Shiv Shankar Prajapati has been making them for the factory for the last 7 years. He learned the tricks of the trade from his father.
हमारा पुश्तैनी काम ये हमारे बाबा करते आए, फिर हम मान लो पिताजी करते आए, फिर हम लोग तैयार हुए, तब से हम लोग कर रहे हैं इसे। और बाकी तो काला नमक मान लो करीब में समय नहीं होगा इसे बनते हुए, कम से कम 70-80 साल हो रहे हैं बनते हुए।
Shiv still uses his family's techniques to make the pots completely by hand. This potter's wheel relies on the momentum from spinning it.
जब देखेंगे उसे उस पर निगाह चलाएंगे सर घुमा करके गौर करेंगे उसी तभी हमारा निगाह जो गड्ढे पर जाएगी तो गड्ढे दिखाई नहीं देता ऐसे अगर देखेंगे तो नहीं दिखाई देगा आएगा वो चला जाएगा वो
Shiv says this step can only be done manually. He has to constantly change how fast he's spinning the clay to get the perfect shape.
जो इलेक्ट्रॉनिक चाक आते हैं उनसे नहीं हो पाता है।
This wooden tool called a thappa helps smooth the pot surface. It takes him 18 minutes to turn this clump of clay into a perfectly round pot. Shiv can make 30 to 35 pots every day. Workers add another layer of clay to the inside and outside of the pot to fill in any cracks, and then leave it to dry for 4 hours. Each kiln can hold up to 32 pots. Workers have to make sure that each one is steady and heated from all sides. So they add pieces of coal and cow dung to fill in any gaps. The temperature can reach up to nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius, and smoke from the burning coals and cow dung consumes the air as they burn.
के समय ये है गर्मियों में नहीं लगती है पसीना सीना नहीं बहता है और गर्मियों में तो यहाँ पे रुका नहीं जाता है मगर तब भी हम लोग ये काम करते हैं मतलब लाल पड़ गई थी उसके बाद में फिर दोबारा जब करने लगो तो वो काम भज जाता है.
When the pots are hot enough, workers add 3 kilograms of raw sambar salt. It is found at Sambar Lake, India's largest inland salt lake, over 670 kilometers away from Lucknow. This mixture of finely ground plants and fruits is the key ingredient in Kala Namak. It gives the salt its signature black color and distinctive flavor. Workers have to be careful as they pour 1 kilogram of it into each pot.
ये गीला नमक डालने से जो अंदर नमक जैसे पानी हो जाता है गल के, तो वो बाहर को उफान मारता है, तो वो बाहर भगता है, तब आदमी को मान लो गिरने व जलने का डर रहता है इससे।
के अंदर तो मालूम चल जाता है हमको। बोला से ये जो ढक्कन है बंद कर दे जाएंगे। उसके बाद ये बिल है, ये इसी से हम लोग देख लेते हैं कि अभी माल पक गया है, कभी कच्चा है, कब डालना है, कब निकालना है, कब मालूम चल जाता है।
After 2 hours, the salt and powder melt together. Workers use an iron rod to check the salt from a distance to avoid getting burned. But it's not always foolproof.
कई बार जल गए हैं और छाले आले पड़ जाते हैं, क्या किया जाए, काम करना ही है, जब कर रहे हैं वही काम तो करना होगा।
Some employees who live at the factory have to deal with the heat all day long.
सारे लोग भाई लोग हमारे हैं यहाँ पे, तो यहाँ पे अच्छा लग रहा है तो आराम से पड़े रहते, खाते हैं, बनाते अपने हाथ, आराम से खा पी कर लेट जाते हैं।
They work through the night, tending to the fire and adding more salt and powder until the pots are filled.
क्या करें, गाना ना सुनने टाइम कट जाता है, रात में उठना पड़ता है ना।
Cooking one batch of Kala Namak takes 24 hours. At around 3 o'clock in the morning, the fire dies out under the pots.
1 घंटे तक मतलब अभी ये जो जिसमें ये डाली गई है बुरादा, वो अभी लंगड़ा नरम है। ठंड हो जाने के कारण पे निकाले जाएंगे, फिर फोड़े जाएंगे।
One pot can weigh up to 35 kilograms. Breaking the pots is the only way to get to the finished Kala Namak. After letting them cool for an hour, workers use hammers to shatter them, revealing the finished salt inside. At this point, the Kala Namak is still extremely hot. So workers cover the balls with raw sambar salt to cool them down. They break the Kala Namak into smaller pieces. Some of it is sold in large chunks. The rest is ground into a fine powder. Although Kala Namak appears black when removed from the pot, the salt crystals look white after grinding.
पीसने पे टेस्ट कोई चेंज नहीं होगा, वो खड़ा है, ये पाउडर है, इसमें टेस्ट में कोई अंतर नहीं आता।
Chetak makes around 250 packets of Kala Namak a day.
तो वो लोग बेचारे जाते हैं लेके घर में टेस्ट करते हैं, उससे हमको ये लगता है हम कुछ अपने क्षेत्र में इस हिसाब से काम हो रहा है।
Ram Chandra Gupta has been running the factory for the past 10 years.
और ये पहचान भी मेरी हो रही, भाई काला नमक वाले हैं।
But now he's on the brink of closing it down. Labor shortages and erratic weather have been threatening the business lately. Ram says fewer people want to do this difficult work.
अब हमारे बच्चे नहीं ये काम को पसंद है कि ना उनका इधर कोई इंटरेस्ट है ना कुछ है।
Even some of his employees aren't interested in passing the traditional craft down to the next generation.
हम तो चाहते हैं कि बच्चे ये काम ना करें, दूसरा काम करें, क्योंकि बहुत मेहनती काम है, कमर तोड़ू काम है, इसमें सबसे ज़्यादा दिक्कत कमर पे आती है, इसलिए सोचते हैं बच्चे ना करें, हमारे तक ही रहे बस।
Demand for Kala Namak has increased in recent years. Its unique taste has made it a popular ingredient for chefs both in India and abroad. In 2023, India was the largest exporter of black salt in the world. To meet this increased demand, black salt producers have shifted from using traditional practices to machines. But this has left factories like Chetak struggling to keep up.
तो 2 भट्टियों की है, कानपुर में एक फैक्ट्री में 20-20, 30-30 भट्टियाँ जलती हैं,
The factory's location in Lucknow has also made it more expensive to get the raw materials like sambar salt.
अब नमक का भाड़ा है जो राजस्थान से कानपुर आ जाएगा वो लखनऊ नहीं आ पाएगा.
Ram's team can make Kala Namak this way year-round. But another, more recent challenge to this tradition is unpredictable weather. He has to watch out for heavy rains, which have been hitting the area even during dry season.
जैसे बारिश होने लगी तो काम बंद हो गया, बारिश निकल गई तो अपना चालू कर दिया.
Rain can also make the already dangerous salt-making process even more risky.
नमक निकलेगा तो गोला भी होता है तो पूरा नमक बाहर ही आ जाता है एकदम भड़ाक से. ये चीज़.
Despite the challenges, Chetak is still the only factory producing Kala Namak for customers in Lucknow. The salt is a key ingredient in Indian street foods like chaat and salads.
काले नमक का इस्तेमाल सर इसलिए कहते हैं कि सबसे शुद्ध नमक वही काला नमक ही कहा जाता है. उसमें ज़्यादा खटास भी नहीं होती है और स्वाद भी आता है पूरा.
In recent decades, the salt has found a home outside of South Asia. Barkha Kardos is a culinary entrepreneur living in New Jersey. She's been eating Kala Namak since she was a little girl in India.
As a child, you didn't pick up on what it specifically was. You just knew there was, a different kind of salt in your drink or your food, or, you topped your yogurt with it.
Today, she brings classic Indian flavors to the American market with her spice blends. She works with a spice company, Burlap and Barrel, to source the Kala Namak she uses from India.
Bringing it to other markets out of India. Not only are we increasing awareness of our beautiful cuisine, but we're also bringing awareness to our farmers, how they work.
The salt is a key ingredient in one of her most popular blends, chaat masala.
So I'm going to add tamarind, ginger, kala namak, chili powder, a little bit of the asafoetida or hing, not a lot, but just a little bit. And then this is all the other spices that we had put in. And this is how I like to taste it. Let's take a little bit of it. Well, of it. It's good. It's sharp. It's spicy. It's tangy.
Over the years, Barkha says she's seen the salt become more widely used in America, especially in vegan cuisine, thanks to its eggy taste.
Just finishing it with a little bit of that black salt, you realize you get a little bit of that flavor, which reminds you of that egg, that you've given up. There are so many amazing chefs, not just Indian, but American chefs that are using it and are talking about it. I'm just so proud and happy that we're opening it up to the world. Something that we all took for granted growing up in India or using it even today. And to then see friends of yours or people you know asking you about it and wanting to learn more about it and use it, it's perfect.
Today, Chetak sells its Kala Namak to merchants who export it to countries like the US and the UK. While Ram doesn't know what the future holds for his factory, he's proud of the work he's done to keep traditional Kala Namak alive.
जीना है तो कुछ ना कुछ तो करना ही है, मगर ये काम अलग करके मुझे बहुत आनंद मिलता है. जब तक मुझसे चलाया जा रहा तब तक चला रहे हैं. अब उसके बाद बच्चों की राय है कि अब वो चला पाते हैं कि नहीं चला पाते.
This is the agave plant from Mexico. It's used to make two of North America's most popular spirits, tequila and mezcal. It's also the main ingredient in one of Mexico's oldest fermented drinks, pulque. Pulque isn't nearly as popular as the other two, but that wasn't always the case. In the late 1800s, pulque was Mexico's most consumed alcoholic drink. But because of false rumors, its reputation as a drink for the poor, and competition from the beer industry, pulque almost completely disappeared.
Hicieron desplazar al pulque, hacer un lado el pulque para...
Now, young Mexicans are fueling a renaissance of the dying drink. But can pulque become a global hit like tequila and mezcal? And how, against all odds, is it still standing? Between tequila, pulque, and mezcal, pulque is the oldest, dating back at least 2,000 years. Even though all three drinks are made from the agave plant, the way they are made makes them taste different. Mezcal gets its smoky flavor from roasting the heart, or the piña, of the agave plant, while the tequila gets its sweet fruitiness from steaming it. Both liquors also have complex distillation processes that can take weeks to complete and result in spirits that contain as much as 55% alcohol. Pulque, on the other hand, is made through natural fermentation, which gives it a slightly sour taste and a much lower alcohol content, around 4%.
I haven't tasted anything quite like pulque. Something like it's slimy, a little bit thick, a little bit heavy on the gut, but yet it's so tasty.
Pulque is also much simpler to make than tequila or mezcal, but producing it still requires the skilled hands of an expert. And Pablo Morales Rodriguez knows exactly what to do. He's been producing pulque in the town of Omealco de Bonfil in central Mexico for the last 8 years.
Porque yo nací entre los magueyes. Yo creo que yo probé el pulque por ahí a los 2, 3 años. Porque en vez de leche nos daban pulque. Claro que si te cedes, pues sí te emborracha. Pero si tomas, vamos a decir a la hora de la comida, 1 litro, te da fuerza, te da energía, te da vigor.
The secret lies in precisely when to cut the agave, or maguey as it's locally known. Pablo has to cut the plant at just the right age to extract the best aguamiel, the sweet sap the agave secretes that ferments into pulque. If he cuts the agave too early, it could produce low-quality aguamiel. If he cuts it too late, the agave might not produce any sap. Pablo uses a metal tool to scrape the heart of the agave.
Se llama raspa. Si no sacamos esto, si no le raspamos, no da aguamiel, no produce.
The agave is typically left to rest for anywhere from 3 months to a year to secrete enough aguamiel to fill the cavity. But beating the bugs has made this more difficult for Pablo.
Este ya hizo daño al maguey. Ya va acá adentro. Esta es la marca de que está afectada Es la amenaza que tiene ahorita. No es una amenaza, sino que es un hecho. Y con alas, vuela, se traslada de lado a lado. Se introduce en la penca del maguey. Pica, pone su huevecillo, se convierte en larva y destruye al maguey. Ya no le va a llegar hasta el corazón, ya le quitamos el daño. Quitamos donde estaba dormido, ya salió. El famoso picudo. Entonces ahora por eso ya no podemos dejar tanto el maguey así. Tenemos que pues explotarlo o dejárselo al picudo.
After 3 months, it's time to extract the aguamiel from the agave. Pablo places an empty bottle with a hose into the cavity.
Para ese proceso tenemos que hacer esto. Tapar esto. Introducir. Ya que está dentro, se destapa. Y ya se le chupa, mira. Supuestamente este es el aguamiel.
This technique has been used by pulque producers, known as tlachiqueros, for centuries. Traditionally, they would use a hollow gourd called an acocote for this step. But Pablo says using an empty bottle is more convenient.
Simplemente una botella y un pedazo de manguera y va para arriba.
Once the cavity is empty, he scrapes the sides again to stimulate more aguamiel production. At this stage, the average agave plant can produce anywhere from 4 to 6 liters of the sap a day. Pablo collects it 2 to 3 times a day. But unpredictable weather makes it more difficult. If rain gets into the cavity, it could spoil the aguamiel.
Tenemos que estar a las vivas de ganarle al agua antes de que llegue el agua, porque de lo contrario, pues, nos gana.
Nicknamed the drink of the gods, pulque was once consumed during sacred rituals in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. The drink lost its religious significance after the Spanish conquered the Aztec Empire in 1521, and it gained massive popularity among everyday people. 500 million liters of pulque were being produced in Mexico every single year by the beginning of the 20th century. But a government-driven anti-pulque campaign following the Mexican Revolution devastated the industry. Land reform in the 1920s and 1930s broke up large agave plantations into smaller plots, making industrial production of the drink impossible. Pulque production dropped from 234 million liters in 1929 to 167 million liters the following year. At the same time, the growing popularity of beer dealt another blow to pulque's popularity. The beer industry started rumors about pulque being fermented with feces, and people began associating the drink with poverty, criminality, and low social class. By the 1950s, only 42,000 acres of agave were being cultivated, less than 7% of what existed in the early 20th century.
Hicieron desplazar al pulque, hacer un lado el pulque para...
Despite the challenges, Pablo says his family had no intention of leaving pulque behind. Even though people stopped drinking pulque in cities, it was still enjoyed in rural areas, like where Pablo's family is from. It was small-scale producers like them who kept pulque from disappearing completely.
Cuando hacía una reunión, por ejemplo, mi papá en un cumpleaños de mi mamá o de su cumpleaños de mi papá, los compadres, en vez de llevar tequilas o cerveza o vinos, jarros de pulque y con eso era su brindis, que lo disfrutaban.
They continued harvesting their agave plants and fermenting their pulque in small rooms called tinacals, like the one Pablo uses today. He pours fresh aguamiel into a plastic barrel with pulque that's been fermenting for up to 3 weeks.
Desde muy antes era barricas, eran de madera. Ahí ponían a fermentar el pulque, en barricas de madera, y luego en ollas de barro. Y ahorita nosotros, pues más fácil y sin broncas, barril de plástico.
He continues to add fresh aguamiel to the plastic barrel little by little for up to 10 days, depending on how strong he wants the batch.
Entonces el pulque tiene 4 etapas: dulce, suave, en su punto y fuerte. A mí me gusta bien hecho, en su punto, ni fuerte ni suave. Listo para el consumo.
In the past, Pablo's family made money selling to local pulquerias, Mexican taverns that specialize in serving the ancient drink. But these specialty bars have been disappearing in Mexico since the mid-1900s. In 1953, there were over 1,200 pulquerias in Mexico City. Nearly 60 years later, that number had dropped to just 72. Since the 1980s, there has been a growing effort to revive pulque in Mexico. In the 2010s, pulque started experiencing a renaissance. Slowly, young Mexicans in search of ways to connect to their roots began flocking to the drink.
Mucha gente dice que ya el pulque no lo toma la juventud, que ya la gente no quiere pulque, pero yo les digo esto, que un buen pulque, donde lo pongas, se va a consumir.
This sentiment rings true at Cactus, a bar and restaurant in Morelia. It's one of several businesses that have opened in Mexico in recent decades to capitalize on pulque's resurgence. Today, the drink is one of its best sellers.
Desde los chavitos de 18 años, que son sus primeras salidas, vienen a hacerse su pulque, como el señor que viene a usar, que viene y consume pulque a modo de remedio. Sí, gran parte de mi clientela vienen y nos buscan específicamente porque vendemos pulque.
Jose Pisano Mancera has been working at Cactus since it opened. It's also where he had his first sip of pulque.
La primera vez que la gente prueba el pulque siempre es como raro, ¿no? De alguna forma el primer trago son sabores a los que normalmente no estamos acostumbrados y sí traía así el prejuicio de que no, sí me irá a gustar, es que huele raro, ¿no? Pero no, bien.
Cactus is one of many businesses in Mexico putting a spin on the traditional drink by offering different flavors like strawberry, mango, and pineapple. Jose says he's been seeing more young people coming in to try the drink.
Entonces, yo recuerdo, por ejemplo, el pulque cuando niño, que era una bebida así muy común, pero de los adultos, muy adultos, ¿no? Que era lo que consumían. Y sí me sorprendió mucho en algún punto llegar aquí y encontrar una mesa de chicos en los 20s y todos pidiendo jarras de pulque, ¿sabes?
Actualmente el mexicano busca mucho la conexión con sus raíces, más en estas últimas décadas, que buscan como emanciparse más de las ideas eurocentristas.
Places like Cactus are also on the front lines of dismissing rumors about the drink.
El rumor más común que yo he escuchado es que lo fermentan con heces, con popó. Y además, la gente siempre te pregunta mucho, ¿no? Oye, ¿y si es cierto que el pulque lleva esto? Regalé infinidad de pruebas de pulque, ¿sabes? Es que nunca lo he probado. Ah, no te preocupes, traigo una prueba.
He believes one day pulque will get the same global recognition as tequila and mezcal. And while those spirits are also served here, for some customers, pulque is in a class of its own.
Pulque is something so unique, so Mexican. I feel like there is nothing that can replicate the flavor of pulque, of good pulque.
El pulque es una bebida que siempre va a estar muy presente en nuestra cultura. Creo que está muy ligada a nuestras raíces, por lo cual pues uno no puede negar la cruz de su parroquia, dice el dicho. Cuando nos dicen, no, pues es una cerveza alemana, ¡ay! Qué bien, ¿no? O qué chido, ha de ser una muy buena cerveza. Y no siempre por ser de fuera es mejor, ¿no? También nosotros tenemos productos, tanto en bebidas, en comidas, en propuestas artísticas, que son muy, muy, muy buenas, ¿no?
Like its descendants tequila and mezcal, pulque is finding its way to store shelves and bars in the US as well. This could be a game changer for the ancient drink, as tequila and mezcal brands have had massive success in the States. In 2023, the US was the biggest market for mezcal and the leading recipient of Mexican tequila exports. Multiple brands have even started selling canned pulque. But expanding pulque globally has proven to be more difficult than tequila and mezcal, mainly because pulque has a shelf life of about 3 days.
Fuera de México, en otros países, pero enlatado. Pero un pulque enlatado pues no va a dar ninguna garantía, vamos.
But for him, making pulque is a labor of love.
Y por ejemplo, ¿y por qué usted sigue haciendo pulque?
Pues yo creo que porque nos gusta el trabajo, nos gusta algo que nuestros padres nos enseñaron.
For now, Pablo is more concerned with keeping pulque making alive and well in Mexico.
Voy a sembrar 100 o 200 o 1000 magueyes y a ver si pegan y a ver si Dios me presta vida para verlos crecer.
But finding the next generation of pulque producers may be the next challenge for the industry. While more people are interested in drinking pulque, Pablo says young people haven't shown an interest in learning how it's made.
Cualquier gente que viene aquí al rancho y ve la magueyera y es lo que dice, ah, qué bonito. Pero ese bonito cuesta trabajo. Poca gente se interesa en dedicarle tiempo al maguey.
Rosalia Che can spend 30 minutes grinding fresh ingredients to make a traditional Maya pork dish called Cochinita pibil. She's one of the few chefs in Mexico who still cooks using one of the oldest forms of barbecue in the world, an underground oven called a bib. Maya people have prepared meals this way since at least 400 AD. But people have abandoned these cooking traditions, swapping bibs for modern stoves, fresh ingredients for pre-packaged sauces, and manual stone grinders for blenders.
Yo no conozco qué es cocina moderna, qué es comida moderna. Lo que a mí me enseñaron mis abuelitos es lo que yo cocino.
So what does it take to preserve an ancient cuisine? And can Rosalia convince others to do the same? We went to Mexico to see how the process of making this Maya dish is still standing. Maya people arrived in the Yucatan Peninsula around 2500 BC. By 250 AD, they had one of the most advanced civilizations in Mesoamerica. They were sophisticated farmers who used astronomy and calendars to guide their harvests. Many of their more than 40 cities featured massive buildings and temples made with stones. Today, the cities are in ruins, but over 1 million Maya people still live in the Yucatan, often in small towns near the historic sites. Rosalia lives in one of the group's oldest settlements in Mexico, Yaxuna. She grows some of the most important ingredients for her cochinita pibil in her backyard.
Si tengo el orégano, el achiote, la naranja.
Achiote seeds are what give the dish its reddish-orange colour and slight peppery flavour. Maya people used it as food colouring, body paint, and even lipstick in ancient times. Rosalia grinds all the ingredients to make the recado, or achiote paste. She uses an ancient tool called a metate, or ka in the Yucatec Mayan language. The recipe takes 6 different spices, and she measures everything by hand as her mother taught her when she was a child.
Ella siempre me ponía a moler el recado. Pues de ahí aprendí, vi cuánto ponía, cuántas cosas, todo lo que pone.
Rosalia finishes the marinade with juice from a Seville orange, a fruit that grows throughout the Yucatan. It's more sour than limes and adds acidity.
El jugo de naranja le puedo poner, si es mucha comida le pongo 3 naranjas, pero si es poco con una naranja.
She massages the paste into the meat before adding it into a large metal pot.
Le ponemos cebolla morada encima. Después lo cubrimos con unas hojas de plátano. La hoja de plátano se lo pongo es para que le dé sabor.
In the Maya community, making cochinita pibil is a family affair. It's traditionally made for celebrations like weddings and birthdays. As the women marinate the meat, men prepare the underground oven called a bib. Rosalia's son starts a fire with wood from 2 native trees, the jabin and the quitinche. They burn slowly and can withstand the high temperatures. He adds large rocks on top. These hold heat even after the fire goes out. It takes 2 hours for the oven to be ready. When it's time to add the pots, Rosalia makes sure to place them between the hot rocks to ensure the pork cooks from all sides. Her son covers the bib with more wood and banana trunks to stop debris from getting into the pots. he adds heat-resistant bags and soil. The pork cooks for 3 hours. The inside of the pib can reach up to 200 degrees Celsius. Outside the Yucatan Peninsula, conventional stoves and ovens have replaced the long process of pib cooking. But Rosalia says the flavor is worth the wait.
Pero tiene más sabor enterrarlo, porque le aporta sabor como enterrarlo, como la tierra, como el tronco de plátano que le ponen.
She raises her own Creole hairless pigs and keeps them on a strict diet of corn and ramon tree leaves.
Las personas de acá o hasta los abuelitos, ellos no comen el otro cerdo. Dicen que no está bueno.
The Maya made the earliest version of Cochinita pibil with venison or wild boar. In the 16th century, Spaniards invading the Yucatan brought with them pigs and sour oranges, which quickly became staples of the dish. But their conquest also devastated indigenous communities there. An estimated 1.5 million Maya had died from disease and warfare by 1600, and the Spanish burned Maya religious books in an effort to force them into Christianity. Preparing traditional dishes like Cochinita pibil was a way for Maya who survived to keep their heritage alive. It's one of the reasons Rosalia believes it's so important to share with others. In 2008, she opened her kitchen to chefs visiting the Yucatan. Corn is the basis of Maya cooking. In the Yucatan, people eat it daily in many forms. And it's the only ingredient in Rosalia's tortillas.
Nuestra tortilla es nuestra cuchara, nuestro cuchillo, nuestro tenedor, todo. Y se puede convertir hasta nuestra servilleta.
Soaking the corn kernels in lime water overnight helps to soften them. They wash them with fresh water for 20 minutes before bringing them to the mill for grinding. This used to be done completely by hand, but with the mill, she can do it 3 times as fast. She's been making tortillas since she was 8 years old.
Porque desde pequeña nos decía mi mamá, tienen que aprender esto.
Today, her daughter-in-law Anna helps her make them. She puts the dough on a griddle called a comal and flips several times until they are lightly toasted. She places them near the fire so they inflate and become more pliable.
Sí, ya me quemé. Eso sí es muy dolida.
Rosalia's sons dig the pots out of the pib once the cochinita is ready. The pots are extremely hot, so they have to be careful when removing them. Then the Cochinita pibil is ready to serve. The pork is typically served in tacos and topped with pickled red onions. It's become the most famous dish of the Yucatan, with many restaurants in the region serving it. But the way it's made today is far from what Rosalia's ancestors' techniques were. Tortillas are now widely mass-produced, and pre-made achiote paste can be found in grocery stores across Mexico.
Para mis abuelitos se van a sentir raros si vivieran. Se van a sentir raros porque si les hablan por esas personas no saben cómo contestar.
Rosalia enjoys cooking other traditional dishes too, like relleno negro, a turkey stew typically made to celebrate the Day of the Dead.
El relleno negro es más tardado, porque todo el día, en esas horas, ya estuvo, ya lo enterraron. Los chiles se queman 3 días antes.
But she says Maya traditions have been abandoned over the years.
Los abuelitos antiguos dicen, tenemos que separar un cerdito para hacer el Día de Muertos, para celebrar. Y ahora muchos que no los celebran porque existió otras religiones.
Even their language has become less popular. Only about a quarter of Maya people in the Yucatan still speak their native tongue.
Y mis abuelos, ellos no hablaban el español para nada. Ellos son maya.
Rosalia has been trying to pass her traditions on to her kids, but they are busy with school.
Yo les digo, sábado y domingo me tienes que ayudar y ahí vas a aprender, poquito a poquito.
And at first, only chefs and a handful of curious tourists would visit Rosalia to taste her food. But everything changed when she was featured on the Netflix show Chef's Table Barbecue in 2020.
¿Te gustaría salir en la tele, me decía? Nunca me lo imaginé, para nada. Si voy a cocinar o si voy a salir en la tele, nunca ni me lo imaginé ni soñarlo.
She started hosting cooking demonstrations at her home the same year. Now she has up to 60 people coming in every week.
We let it there burning for around 1.5 hours, 2 hours, until we have only the embers.
Y ahora no, ahora viene de todo el mundo.
I learned that good food takes time, and being obsessed with good ingredients and doing things a traditional way, the results pay off in the end.
Realmente te explota la cabeza el saber el proceso de cómo se hace, cómo lo puede vivir uno aquí. Es un orgullo conocer a una persona como ella, la experiencia de con qué sentimiento o emoción lo hace.
For Rosalia, making these dishes represents the beauty of her heritage and a way to share it with the world.
Ahorita me siento feliz y contenta de todo lo que estoy haciendo desde mi cocina, de lo que estoy enseñando.
She hopes the next generation will fall in love with cooking the way she has. But for now, she's proud of doing her part to keep Maya traditions alive.
Peeling this gelatinous Kueh Lapis layer by layer is the correct way to eat it.
If you chew it without peeling, it means that you are actually shortening your lifespan.
For almost 80 years, Edmund Wong's family has been making these bite-sized treats in Singapore. Crafting them is part of a culture that goes back about 500 years. Nonya Kueh is historically significant to the Peranakan people, a cultural group prominent between the 15th and early 20th centuries that's working to be remembered today. Their varied and colorful snacks are a staple of Southeast Asian cuisine. But as the popularity of Nonya Kueh increases, some shopkeepers like Edmund fear its Peranakan roots will be forgotten.
For our business, we see us being not just only a food business, but a heritage business. People may enjoy to eat them, but they may not know the meaning behind it, and they may lose touch with the heritage.
We went to Singapore to see how Peranakan culture and the art of making Nonya Kueh is still standing. Kueh is a broad term for bite-sized snacks or desserts commonly found in Southeast Asia, including cakes, dumplings, and pastries. Kueh are prepared differently by multiple cultures in the region. The ones made by Singapore's Peranakan community are called Nonya Kueh. The neighborhood of Joo Chiat has long been a center of Peranakan culture. It's where the shop Kim Joo Kueh Chong has been located since 1945.
This business started off from my grandma. She started selling rice dumplings under a banyan tree, and that's how we started.
Edmund still uses her recipes to make all the shop's kueh. Today, the team is making a batch of one of their most popular items, Kueh Lapis. It's a 9-layer steamed cake made with a base of tapioca flour, coconut milk, and sugar.
In Chinese, we also call it 9层糕, which means 9-layer kuehs. When our forefathers came here, They couldn't use ingredients from China, so they used local ingredients like coconut shred, palm sugar, and then we create something that looks Chinese, but it's not Chinese.
Workers mix the ingredients into a paste and strain it. Kueh Lapis is known for its colorful layers. In the past, makers would use plants for natural coloring, like butterfly pea flowers for blue shades or pandan leaves for green. But today, Edmund uses store-bought dyes to get each layer to the perfect shade of red or green. Each layer must be steamed one by one. Then workers repeat the process of pouring and steaming 8 times. With this step, timing is everything. Pour in a layer too early and the colors could mix together, ruining the entire batch. So workers carefully steam each layer for exactly 5 minutes at 100 degrees Celsius. Because it's made without preservatives, the shop only makes about 320 Kueh Lapis a day.
We try not to sell too much because all these items cannot be kept long. It's best eaten on the day when it's being produced and best eaten fresh.
There's also a specific way to eat Kueh Lapis.
You peel it layer by layer. The different colors of the kueh represents different phases of our lives. If you chew it without peeling, it means that you are actually shortening your lifespan because you're missing out so much of your life.
I've been eating kueh since 4 years ago. At first, I would just take it manually and just put it in my mouth. But after the staff here told me that I'm supposed to peel one by one and taste the flavor, that's where I realized that I have eaten Kueh Lapis wrongly ever since 4 years ago.
My grandma, before she passed on, she would say that live your life like the Kueh Lapis. You know, even if you're met with difficult times, continue to peel through that layer, you eventually see a bright color.
Researchers believe kueh originated in southern Fujian, China, and were first introduced to Southeast Asia by Chinese traders who migrated to Malaysia during the 15th century. These traders married local Malay women, and their descendants, known as Straits Chinese or Peranakan, preserved their traditions, including making Nonya kueh for celebrations like Chinese New Year. When the British established a port in Singapore in 1819, many Peranakans migrated there for trade opportunities. Their fluency in Chinese, Malay, and English helped them become middlemen between British and locals during the colonial era. By the early 20th century, they were among Southeast Asia's most influential people, contributing their own distinct art, fashion, architecture, and food throughout the region. But Japan's occupation of Singapore during World War II devastated the community. Many Peranakans, including Edmund's grandmother, lost their fortunes and had to sell their belongings to survive.
During the time of war, she had to try and make a living for herself. And the only skill set she had back then were the culinary skills passed down to her from her maternal grandmother. It's not meant to be a business. It's really for survival.
The decades following World War II also marked a shift to modernization in Singapore. Many Peranakans left their traditions behind. By the 1970s, the community was on the verge of extinction. For Edmund's grandmother and other Peranakans, selling their Nonya kueh was a way to make a living while keeping their culture alive. And Edmund is working to do the same in her honor.
Oh, my grandma is not educated, but she teach us through the things that she knew, like kueh and the cookies and rice dumplings.
These rice dumplings, or kueh chong, have been prepared the same way since the shop opened. Workers start by filling pandan leaves with rice and meat and wrapping them into a pyramid shape. Then the dumplings are tied with a small rope and boiled for 1.5 hours. These days, kueh chong is the shop's best seller.
During non-festive season, we produce about 1,000 plus a day. During the festive season, you see us producing more than thousands, maybe 10, 20, 30,000 pieces a day.
Over several decades, Nonya Kueh has gone from a Peranakan delicacy to a staple for all Southeast Asians throughout Singapore.
We are a brand that has been around since 1945. So basically, you will see us as a brand that grew with Singapore. We are really fortunate that throughout the generations, we have a lot of Singaporeans and foreigners supporting us.
But because kueh has become more popular, some see it as a Singaporean delicacy instead of a Peranakan one. And Edmund worries its Peranakan roots could be forgotten over time.
All these Peranakan stories, it tells us how to live our life. One of these days, if the stories are not being shared, then my fear is, yes, people may enjoy to eat them, but they may not know the meaning behind it, and they may lose touch with the heritage.
That's why he believes it's so important to share Peranakan history with others while he can. Kim Chu Kway Chong partnered with the Singaporean government to convert a portion of its restaurant into a boutique shop and museum. Visitors can attend guided tours to learn about the different aspects of Peranakan heritage. The collection includes family heirlooms, art, and traditional clothing.
A lot of these items were either from my grandmother, or of which late, a lot of families who do not wish to keep them anymore, we actually do purchase directly from them if they no longer want to keep them. We share stories here. We teach people how to consume the food. We teach them about the history, about why we eat certain things certain way. And it's really important. More than the food, we want to be custodians. We want to promote the Peranakan heritage.
Edmund isn't the only one working to preserve this unique culture. Since the 1980s, preservationists and the Singaporean government have worked to promote Peranakan culture. Today, Singapore is home to multiple government-backed Peranakan museums and exhibits like the one at Kim Chu Kway Chong, as well as programs meant to preserve Peranakan architecture.
The Peranakan community or the culture is not about the marriage of races. It is largely about the marriage of cultures. And if we can embrace this concept and help more of us understand it, basically all of us in Singapore, even in Southeast Asia, can embrace and share this culture also. Ever since I found out much about my heritage, it gives me identity. I know my heritage. I know my culture. I will always remember that this is my home and I always have to come back here.
His hope is that the next generation will get to understand the history behind the kueh they know and love. Passing down his grandmother's legacy is the best way to do that.
In the same way stories being passed down to her, she also passed down to us, to this generation, and we hope that we can continue to share this story with many more generations to come.
One of the most sacred objects in Judaism is made of skin from a bull's neck. It's called Tefillin, and it's an ancient custom to connect hands, hearts, and minds with God. Each black box contains scrolls that must be written by hand.
It's done the same way it was done 3,300 years ago.
Throughout history, Jews have been persecuted, forcing them to sometimes wear tefillin in secret. But demand has soared since the latest war in Israel and Gaza that erupted on October 7th. Mostly from less religious Jews.
I think it's important for them to be here.
Including Israeli soldiers headed into battle. Now, traditional workshops can't make tefillin fast enough. So what does it say inside these little boxes? And why are so many people trying to get their hands on them? We went to Israeli workshops to find out how this ritual is still standing. The scrolls inside tefillin are made from parchment, just as they were thousands of years ago. The fur is scraped off an animal hide and then stretched out to dry. For a Jewish ritual object, the hide must come from a cow, sheep, or other animal considered kosher to eat.
Every piece of parchment comes out different. Some is thicker, some is thinner, some is more hairy, some is more shiny.
Rabbi Chaim Kaplan runs Otzar Hastam, a workshop in Safed in northern Israel that writes tefillin and Torah scrolls. Scribes like Asaf Levi start by sanding the parchment and then sprinkling it with chalk.
זה מחליק לי את הקלף, יוצר לו מרקם, גם יוצר לו מרקם קטיפתי, כדי שהדיו יחליק ויזרום, וגם מונע התפשטויות של הדיו.
Asaf adds a layer of this special adhesive liquid called mei haklaf.
אין לו אפקט של דבק כמו שאנחנו מכירים, זה לא דביק. אבל הוא עושה אפקט של הדבקה בעצם של הגיר והפודרה.
These parchments have been pre-etched with straight horizontal lines. Torah scrolls, which contain the entire Hebrew Bible, have 42 lines of text on each page. The smaller scrolls inside tefillin have just 4 or 7 lines. A humidifier runs all day to help the ink set on the parchment. It's always quiet here. Scribes, or sofrim in Hebrew, must maintain a state of intense focus. Most of them use a feather quill, sometimes with a tip made from steel or gold. In the past, they used reed pens. Other scribes prefer a newer ceramic pen that never needs sharpening.
יש לו את היתרון שהוא מאוד יציב והוא לא נשחק כמו הנוצה. אפשר לכתוב איתו ספר תורה שלם אפילו בלי למצמץ.
The main ingredient in the ink is soot. Traditional recipes also include gum arabic, the juice of a gallnut, and a single drop of honey.
יש נוסחה מאוד מאוד מדויקת איך לעשות את הדיו, ואם לא עושים את הדיו בנוסחה המדויקת הזאת, אז הדיו הזה הוא לא כשר.
Working at a steady pace, it takes Ezra Abadi a day or two to finish all the scrolls that go into a pair of tefillin, and over a year to write an entire Torah. If a scribe adds an extra letter or misses one, or even writes one incorrectly, then the tefillin is invalid, and a simple mistake can cost him days of lost labor.
Some mistakes under some circumstances can be fixed, can be erased, some cannot.
It's Avraham ben Simon's job to try and fix as much as possible.
שהיה לנו פה חשש של נגיעה פה בין אותיות, הן לא באמת נוגעות, פה בזרחה, הן לא באמת נוגעות, אבל בשביל שככה יהיה יותר רווח.
Avraham has been doing this job for 20 years. He spends about an hour checking every scroll. A computer does a final scan to ensure accuracy.
There are many laws, how to do it, how to write, how it should look, and it's could be sometimes draining.
Rabbi Kaplan has run this workshop for over 15 years, and he says he's never seen a time like this.
Demand keeps growing and growing, and we try our best to produce as much as we can to supply the needs of Jews all around the world.
The completed scrolls end up in leather boxes, like the ones made at another workshop about 130 miles to the south. The leather used to come from sheep, but now...
האור הזה הוא בעצם עשוי מצבא של פר.
Rabbi Ishai Ba'avad founded Tefillin Beit El in 1979 in a religious settlement in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Each piece starts at around 2 feet long. Craftsmen shape the compartments for the scrolls by making these bumps. They take the skin and start stretching it. These nubs will eventually be compacted into a cube just a few inches wide. They have to do it in stages, or it will break. Religious law regulates every step in the making of tefillin. One of the rules is that the single strip of leather must not get punctured.
במקרה אתם רואים פה שהתפילין האלה נפסלו. הליצה החיצונה היא התפוצצה ואנחנו רואים חור.
Shaping the compartments that will eventually hold the scrolls can take up to a year. It all depends on the artisan's techniques and the climate where he works. The leather dries faster in arid parts of Israel. Workers shave away excess leather in between trips to the hydraulic press.
הוא חותך בזהירות, אם הוא יחתוך יותר מדי הוא יכול ליצור חור.
These 4 metal bars keep the empty spaces in place. They repeat this step up to 15 times, and each time, the boxes take on more precise angles. The leather needs to dry and set after each squeeze.
פשוט, אני אדפוק, ואתם תשמעו את הצליל. זה יבש. יבש.
Workers trim excess material and press it until they get a square shape. According to Jewish mysticism, the shape reflects the architecture of the Jewish temple that once stood in Jerusalem, where Al-Aqsa Mosque is today.
ככה נעשה עוד פעם, עוד פעמיים, עד שהוא יהיה לגמרי מושלם.
These fully formed casings, batim in Hebrew, are 40 millimeters by 40 millimeters. The sides are embossed with the Hebrew letter Shin, an initial representing 2 of God's names. The letter is accentuated using a set of small scrapers. Workers bend the extra material backward, creating the bottom flap for the boxes.
היא הכנה של האור לקראת הקיפול, כדי שהוא יתקפל יפה.
To refine the angles and symmetry, craftsmen use bandsaws and sanders. This bell-shaped tool carves a notch for the leather straps. By now, the leather is as hard as wood. The bottom panel is carefully cracked open, revealing the compartments within. The 4 biblical passages in Tefillin outline the core beliefs of Judaism. 2 commemorate the exodus from Egypt and the obligation to educate children about it. The others hold the Shema prayer, which proclaims there's only one God. The passages are written on a single long scroll for the arm tefillin and 4 separate scrolls for the head. Workers tie both parts with calf's hair and sew the boxes shut with sinew from the lower leg of a cow. Once the scrolls are placed inside, they're only removed every few years to make sure the letters haven't smudged or broken. They airbrush the batim with a coat of black paint to match the color of the straps in the next step. Black absorbs all colors and doesn't reflect any back. According to tradition, this represents how God exists throughout the universe without any divisions or separations. The straps are usually 2 to 3 feet long, enough to wrap around a person's arm at least 7 times, a number that represents completeness in Judaism. According to religious law, men over the age of 13 are supposed to bind tefillin every weekday. The earliest evidence of tefillin comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls, dating as far back as the 3rd century BC. But the details of how to make and wear them are said to have been passed down orally from Moses at Mount Sinai. Other sources indicate that the practice emerged during the 2nd century BC when the Jewish Maccabees were at war with occupying Syrian Greek forces. Several empires outlawed Jewish practices, including tefillin. Later, when praying with them wasn't technically illegal, it had fallen out of popularity. For most of modern history, wearing tefillin was a practice mainly observed by the most religious Jewish sects. It took a war to change that nearly 60 years ago.
Israel Defense Forces have taken necessary steps to meet all eventualities.
In 1967, tensions between Israel, Palestinians, and surrounding Arab states were at an all-time high. A month before the Six-Day War started, the leader of the Chabad Hasidic movement in New York urged his followers to help others put on tefillin.
Und damit ist wird mekuye, als wie schaftem leveter bejatzichem, als eben in Eretz Yisrael werden sitzen dort sicher.
He said they would provide Israel with spiritual protection.
הם יצאו לרחובות לשכנע את העוברים ושבים להניח תפילין כדי להציל את העם ולהטיל אימה על אויבינו.
Israeli forces captured East Jerusalem in June 1967, including the walled Old City, which has sites sacred to Muslims, Christians, and Jews. This area is controlled by Israel to this day and remains a contentious flashpoint. And today's ongoing fighting with Hamas in Gaza pushed many Israeli soldiers to seek out their own pair.
I cannot tell you how many soldiers going into Gaza said to me, I'm not going into Gaza without tefillin. Right? I was shocked.
Just like in 1967, rabbis and yeshiva students have increased outreach to Jews around the world who have never worn tefillin.
It's like a blood pressure. Jewish blood pressure, exactly.
The rabbi who ignited the tefillin revival died in 1994. But many of his followers regularly make the pilgrimage back to his synagogue in New York City.
I serve in Ukraine, and coming here for the few days to be with my colleagues, with the Rebbe, gives me energy for the whole year.
Over 5,000 rabbis from the Chabad Lubavitch movement gather each year in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, for an international conference of shluchim, the Hebrew word for emissaries, including Rabbi Kaplan, who oversees the scribes' workshop in Safed. He said that these rabbis from around the world are his biggest customers. Rabbi Avraham Rappaport lives in New Jersey. He makes TikTok and Instagram posts about Judaism.
I feel like there's a renaissance, there's an awakening of this Jewish soul. You can be in America and protect and bring a blessing to a Jew on the other side of the world. So tefillin's a good way to start.
A 2023 survey of these rabbis, representing thousands of international Jews, found that almost every single one of their congregations had witnessed an increase in traditional observance since October 7th.
Yesterday I picked up 6 pairs of tefillin, new pairs of tefillin for people who have committed to put on tefillin every day.
There's no official count, but several organizations estimate that tens of thousands of new pairs of tefillin have been distributed all over the world in the past few months.
By the way, this is a pair of tefillin ordered yesterday on the way to Manhattan, New York, being shipped now.
At the same time, scribes across Israel have been called up for military duty, and others have found it hard to stay focused.
I have a couple of scribes who couldn't write. After the attack on Simchat Torah, they couldn't come to work, or they came and said, I'm sorry, Rabbi Kaplan, I can't write. My head is somewhere else, and I'm making mistakes. I'm just wasting my time.
So there's a growing backlog, even as the orders are rolling in. A pair of tefillin can cost from $450 to over $2,500. But as scribes do their jobs, Rabbi Kaplan has lost an important source of income: tourism.
People come here for the good breathe and for the spiritual air that there is here.
This hilltop city is one of the 4 holiest cities in Judaism. It has undergone much change over the centuries, amid war and population shifts. It's now almost completely Jewish, after its Palestinian population fled or were driven from their homes in the 1948 war. And once again, the shadow of war has fallen over the city the last few months, as the fear of rockets from Lebanon has left the streets empty.
This is usually full of tourists. Look, it's locked, it's empty. There's nothing here, nothing happening.
The visitor center attached to Rabbi Kaplan's workshop is also empty.
This center was a vibrant visitor center, and since October 7th, we had no visitors.
But it's filled with reminders that Jews have kept their faith in tough times before.
These are really tiny old set of tefillin, which people say they were able to actually hide and use during challenging times, if it's to during the Holocaust or communist Soviet Russia. They were able to hide them in their pockets and use them every day.
Rabbi Kaplan believes that struggles push believers to search for meaning in life.
People are seeking and searching for some connection to something greater, bigger than what we just see around us, which is so shaky.
He says that the practice of tefillin is a statement of faith in God, but that it's people who have the power to make things better.
This is a reminder we have through our command of tefillin, and this is a reminder which belongs to every human being.
These little clay vessels might be the oldest disposable cups in the world. Evidence of their use in the Indian subcontinent goes back 5,000 years. That's the end of the Stone Age. Traditionally, they're meant to be sipped from and tossed out. The cups are called kulhads, or kulhars, or ba, or shikora, depending on who you ask. Whatever you call them, the convenient cups have nearly always been the preferred vessel for tea shops throughout the region. Enter single-use plastic and paper. Today, more and more tea shops are giving up their traditional kulhad in favor of alternatives, which means less income for kulhad craftsmen.
काम करके भी हम लोग का पेट ठीक से नहीं भरने पाता, परिवार का पालन पोषण भी ठीक से नहीं हो सकता.
Cheaper prices make plastic and paper appealing to businesses that can end up going through thousands of cups a day. But proponents of the kulhad say that plastic is bad for your health, bad for the environment, and bad for business. The reality is a bit more nuanced than that. Is the simple kulhad really better than a plastic cup? And how long will it stick around? We went to Calcutta, India to see how traditional clay teacups still stand despite the rise of paper and plastic. Jayaprakash Prajapati's workday lasts longer than the sun's. From 4 a.m. to 10 p.m., he and his family make about 2,500 kulhads each day.
हम लोग का ड्यूटी 17 से 18 घंटा पड़ जाता है.
He estimates he's made over 10 million cups since he started 25 years ago.
अरबों लोगों ने आपके चाय से पिए होंगे, इससे मैं आपके चाय पिए.
उससे और अधिक भी हो सकते हैं.
Their design is deceptively simple. Unpainted, handleless vessels for drinking tea.
केवल प्लेन का प्लेन ही देते हैं, एकदम शुद्ध देते हैं.
It's a design that's been perfected over thousands of years by generations of craftsmen in India.
कि हम लोग शुरू से ही हम लोग को ये बाप दादा करते आए हैं, हम लोग भाड़ बनाते आए हैं और अभी तक हम लोग बना रहे हैं.
It's hard, relentless work.
बहुत गर्म है.
कम पकड़ा जा रहा है.
After unloading the previous day's batch from the oven, workers prepare the clay for today's array of kulhads.
सबसे ज़्यादा मेहनत पहले इसमें तो है मिट्टी बनाना.
They use a wire and their feet to slice and mix the clay, evening out its consistency and making it easier to work with. This clay, fresh from the ground, is the only ingredient in Jayaprakash's kulhads. And it gets more expensive year after year.
मिट्टी का अभी रेट तो फिलहाल बहुत हो गया है. पहले तो कम ही था. अभी 10 से 11,000 रुपया गाड़ी आता है.
He has no choice but to purchase from local sellers at whatever price the Potters Union sets. The cost of importing clay would eat into what little profit he already makes, and he can't use just any soil.
इस मिट्टी में लहसुन है. तो सब मिट्टी में बालू मिट्टी है. उसमें लहसुन नहीं है.
Before it's ready to shape into kulhads, bits of stone and grass need to be removed from the clay. Pebbles could cause the cups to explode in the oven, and grass could burn away and leave holes. Traditionally, it's men who make kulhads, but everyone in Jayaprakash's household works to keep up with demand.
घर का जो काम है थोड़ा लेडीज़ लोग जो हैं हम लोग का अपना खाना पीना बनाने के बाद समय बचता है तो अपना वो भी कर लेते हैं, थोड़ा बहुत हाथ बटा देते हैं, थोड़ा हम लोग को भी राहत मिल जाता है।
The tea shops he supplies expect deliveries daily.
हम लोग का चाय की दुकान में कोई दुकान है 1000, 1500, 2000 भी भाड़ लग जाता है।
At its current size, Jaya Prakash's workshop can only manage to produce around 2,500 cups a day. This makes it difficult to create any sort of backstock, meaning the workshop has to be in perpetual production mode.
यानी पहले तो बड़ा बाजार के अंदर में इतना माने कुल्हड़ लगता था कि हम लोग देने नहीं सकते थे। जब से ये कागज़ कप, प्लास्टिक कप निकला है, तब से बहुत नॉर्मली हो गया है।
The air-dried kulhads are laid out in a series of tight concentric circles and fired overnight.
सावधानी जितने सावधानी रखेंगे तब तो बचेगा, नहीं तो सब टूट जाएगा।
This formation efficiently bakes up to 10,000 kulhads at a time. But right now, it's monsoon season, which means even after a night in the oven, the kulhads might not be dry.
काम लो हो जाता है, लॉस होता है, क्योंकि माल ठीक से सूखता नहीं है। मैंने सुबह का माल बनाया जो सूखता नहीं है, और शाम का भी माल जो बनाया होता है वो भी भट्टी में ठीक से नहीं सूखता।
Setbacks like this make it even harder for Jaya Prakash to keep up with the already overwhelming demand.
पानी में न पानी माटी का भांड कैसे सुखाएगा? जब आता नहीं तब हम देखो कागज के काम में चाह देता है।
Paper and plastic cups are cheaper and more convenient than kulhads, making them an appealing alternative to tea shops operating on razor-thin margins. Vendors like Kashinath Kole buy cups from Jaya Prakash for about half a rupee apiece. He can get paper cups for close to a fifth of a rupee apiece.
इसमें 6 रुपया देते हैं और ये जो कागज के कप 5 रुपया।
Despite the markup, most of the 100 to 150 cups of tea he sells each day come in kulhads.
भांड में चाय पीने से इधर बहुत आदमी बोलता बहुत अच्छा, और भांड नहीं रहेगा उसे चाय पीने से मजा नहीं आता है।
Kulhad proponents are adamant that tea sipped from clay tastes better.
वो भांड में चाय डाले देखो, वो तो माटी का भांड ना थोड़ा से टान लेता है।
वो मिट्टी का भी रहता है और जो आग में जलाता है तो।
With plastic, it's more than flavor that seeps into your tea. Numerous studies have shown that hot liquids in plastic cups, as well as paper cups coated with plastic, can leach microplastics and a chemical called bisphenol A from the container. Even in fine amounts, bisphenol A, or BPA, has been linked to cancer, reproductive issues, problems with brain development, and many other diseases and dysfunctions. Research on microplastics is limited, but they're associated with a similar laundry list of potential issues. There's no evidence that drinking from a kulhad has any negative effect on a person's health. But what about making a kulhad?
कमर टूट जाती होगी भैया पूरे समय झुके हुए?
टूट जाता है, बहुत मेहनत होता है। ज़्यादा उम्र तक नहीं होना सकती।
आपके पापा कितनी एज में रिटायर हो गए?
पापा हमारे 40 से 45 साल में रिटायर हो गए, 40 साल नहीं हो।
आपकी उम्र कितनी भी है?
हमारी उम्र अभी 36-37 साल है। इसमें ज़्यादातर करके सांस का माने बीमारी होते हैं।
धुएं में क्योंकि काम
बस वही थोड़ा सांस लेने में तकलीफ होता है।
The kulhad might not be as eco-friendly as it's chalked up to be either. Kulhad proponents claim that because the cups are made from earth, they are easily biodegradable. But there haven't been any formal studies about this. Adding moisture to air-dried clay easily dissolves it. But fired clay is chemically changed into a more durable material. The reason we even know kulhads have been used for 5,000 years is that modern archaeologists were able to find surviving examples of them. Some craftsmen will bake their kulhads at lower temperatures to make the final product more easily disposable. But most kulhads aren't composted or handled in any specific way. When he's done drinking, Sumit's kulhad will go into the trash.
जो महिला झाड़ू फाड़ू रास्ता झाड़ू लगाता है ना, वो आवाज उठा के वो कहाँ पर फेंक देता है.
Despite the immense challenges, Jaya Prakash is determined to keep making kulhads. He hopes to make more profit in order to improve conditions and hire new craftsmen.
अच्छा माने प्रगति जाते हुए नहीं दिखाई दे रहा है. इसका जितना आगे जा रहा है उतना कमज़ोर होते जा रहा है, क्योंकि जितना खटनी है इसमें मेहनत है उस हिसाब से पैसा नहीं है, इसलिए और नए बच्चे हम लोग के यहाँ.
Kulhad prices are set by a union, so Jaya Prakash has no control over them. And if prices get too high, tea shops might turn away from them completely.
सरकार यदि मदद करता तो हम लोग को कोई दिक्कत ही नहीं होती. सरकार हम लोग के लिए कुछ भी नहीं करने में असमर्थ नहीं करने पा रही है.
The Indian government has made efforts to support kulhad craftsmen in the past. Like in 2020, when the Railways Minister announced that all of India's trains and 7,000 stations would serve tea exclusively in kulhads. The initiative started with only 400 stations. More joined over the years, but progress appears to have stalled. Despite initiatives like these, kulhad craftsmen are dwindling.
नहीं, उनकी तादाद दिन पर दिन कमी हो रही है. बहुत से लोग छोड़ दिए हैं, क्योंकि इसमें माने जो सब वगैरह चीज़ के दाम हो गए हैं ना, अभी लोग को पोसाई नहीं देता.
Jaya Prakash says he doesn't feel like he's competing with other craftsmen.
केवल हम लोग को कंपटीशन प्लास्टिक से ही है.
Plastic has already taken out a previous arm of his business.
प्लास्टिक का जो बाटी निकला है, सब अभी सब उसी में इस्तेमाल करते हैं. हम लोग का वो सब मार्केट चला गया. माने हम लोग इसी के भरोसे थे, लेकिन अभी हम लोग को समझ लिए बहुत तकलीफ होता है. काम करके भी हम लोग का पेट ठीक से नहीं भरने पाता. परिवार का पालन पोषण भी ठीक से नहीं हो सकता.
His family has relied on this workshop for almost 100 years, but its future is uncertain.
लेकिन जैसा लगता है कि भाई जब तक उनका माने हिम्मत या माने बल पौरुष चलेगा तब तक तो करेंगे. जब नहीं करने लायक रहेंगे तो भाई छोड़ देंगे, फिर नहीं.
This artist is mixing together a special glue using araldite and zinc powder. It's one of the ways artists in India have updated the art of parchin kari, or marble inlay, since it was used 400 years ago to decorate the Taj Mahal. Artisans work with such small pieces, they say the strain can damage their eyesight, and the wear and tear on the skin causes them to lose their fingerprints. But now this work, which lines the walls of one of the world's most famous buildings, is in danger of disappearing. Today, artists make most of their money selling pieces to tourists visiting the Taj Mahal. But the COVID-19 pandemic weakened tourism and led to a steep decline in marble inlay artists. The job is also not as lucrative as it once was, forcing generations of younger artists to choose different career paths than their ancestors. We went to Agra in Uttar Pradesh, India, to find out how parchin kari is still standing. Arif Ahmed is a direct descendant of artisans who decorated the Taj Mahal. His family is one of only a few left carrying on the marble inlay tradition in India.
बहुतों ने छोड़ दिया, ये मैं समझता हूँ कि 50% लोगों ने छोड़ दिया होगा.
And that number could be even higher. According to some estimates, the number of marble inlay artisans in Agra has declined by up to 70% over the last 2 decades. For Arif, this work is a source of pride, and its disappearance would be devastating. He started learning the art of parchin kari from his father when he was just about 10 years old.
पच्चीकारी का मेहनत का तो बहुत काम है, मगर क्या है कि लोगों को उस हिसाब से पैसे नहीं.
His father, Hafiz Ahmed Khan, was granted the esteemed title of Shilp Guru by the Indian government and has won national awards for his marble work.
उनसे बढ़िया कोई पॉपी फ्लावर बनाया नहीं आज तक.
Today, Arif is using many of the same tools, methods, and materials that his ancestors did. Starting with high-quality marble sourced from Makrana, a small city near Jaipur, Rajasthan. It's durable, water-resistant, and has few impurities. It's also high in calcium, which gives it its pure white color. Varun Bansai has been working with Arif for about 15 years. He learned the marble craft from his father and grandfather. This same kind of marble was used to build the walls of the Taj Mahal. Varun and his team quarry raw slabs of marble and cut them using circular saws to separate the clean, usable chunks. Water helps cool the blade and reduce dust while they work. They then mold and carve the marble into tabletops of various shapes and sizes for the artisans. Finally, they deliver the finished marble to showrooms and to artisans like Arif. Today, Arif's team is designing an elephant sculpture made from Makrana marble, a popular souvenir among tourists visiting the Taj Mahal. Designers first cover the marble in brightly colored water-based acrylic paint, so the patterns they draw stand out better against the white marble. They draw freehand designs directly onto the painted marble with a pencil. The designs can be quite complex, like this one with thousands of flower petals, leaves, and thin vines. The patterns are often inspired by the inlay on the Taj Mahal, which looms over the city of Agra. The Taj Mahal was built between 1631 and 1648 under Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. The marble was carried in using elephants from Jaipur. To decorate the walls, trained inlay workers were brought in from Persia. A debunked legend held that the Shah forced the artisans to have their hands cut off after they were finished, so they couldn't replicate the beauty of the Taj Mahal anywhere else. Even though no one really lost their hands, Arif says Shah Jahan made sure the secrets of the art were protected in other ways.
का मुराद ये था कि जिस बिल्डिंग में आपने जैसे ये काम करा है तो आप उन लोगों को इतना मुआवजा दिया कि आप ये काम दूसरी जगह उस पीरियड में नहीं करेंगे.
Many of the Persian artisans used their payment to put down roots in Agra, and thanks to their descendants, the city is still today a major producer of Parchin Kari. A Parchin Kari artist will eventually fill each of these outlined spaces with a small piece of precious or semi-precious stone, chosen based on its color and aesthetics. While the marble comes from India, the stones are sourced from all over the world, including from Japan, Germany, and Iran.
ये चारों सेमी प्रेशियस स्टोन है और ये रोज क्वार्ट्ज है अपना. ये अपने पास अगेट है. ये लेपिस है, लेपिस लाजूरी, और ये अपना मेलाकाइट है. कलर के ऊपर भी डिपेंड करता है. कलर अच्छा होगा तो जाहिर सी बात है कि उसका रेट भी ज़्यादा ही होगा.
Artisans buy these stones from local shops where they're widely available. The more stones used in the design, the more expensive the final piece will be.
I think it's near about 10,000 stone in this.
Arif estimates a table like this would cost about 40,000 rupees, or $480. It also has lights installed beneath it to illuminate the finished design. The size of the piece will also affect the price and increase the amount of time it takes to finish.
ये पीकॉक का डिज़ाइन का ये है, तो अब इसको बनाने में ये इसमें कोई वर्क में तकरीबन कोई 5 स्क्वायर फीट है. इसके अंदर कम से कम 15 दिन जाएंगे. मोज़ाइक वर्क है. बॉर्डर इसका MOP मदर ऑफ पर्ल का है. बाकी का अब इटालियन स्टोन है और आपका इंडियन स्टोन है कुछ. तो इसको इधर से टूटने के चांसेस है ट्रांसपोर्ट के अंदर. बड़ा पीस है.
The smaller, more detailed work Arif describes as intoxicating work because it requires more time and intense concentration to get right.
ये 32 पीस हैं इसके अंदर. 8 पीस ये, बाकी 20 पीस ये हैं, 4 पीस ये हैं.
It takes half a day just to make one of these flowers.
अक्सर टूटे आते हैं ज़्यादातर. बड़ी उससे मेहनत से मशक्क़त से उसको बचाना पड़ता है।
Arif says this work could damage his eyes from the strain if he does it for too many years. But choosing which stone goes where is one of his favorite stages of the creative process. When the designer is satisfied with their rough design, the artist traces it onto a sheet of translucent butter paper. They mark each tiny petal and leaf on the paper, like a massive and complex color by number, noting which stone will be placed where.
कम्युनिकेशन भी ज़रूरी है, तो बिना कलर कम्युनिकेशन के कोई चीज़ अच्छी नहीं लगेगी।
Then they retrace these shapes directly onto the flat precious stones, with red or blue carbon paper placed in between. Cutting out these shapes requires a rotating wheel with very sharp diamond-edged blades. Each blade lasts for only about 3 days. Depending on the hardness of the stone, they could wear out even faster.
जितने थोड़ा थोड़ा देखना करीब 2 mm का या करीब 2-3 mm का ये डायमंड है बस। ये खत्म हो जाएगा, यहाँ तक हो जाएगा खत्म, बेकार ब्लेड बेकार हो जाएगा।
Updated technology like this has sped up the inlay process quite a bit since the days of the Taj Mahal.
जो काम आज 15 मिनट में होता है वो पूरे दिन के अंदर होता था।
But some artisans, like Shafiq Uddin, still choose to use the tools of their ancestors, like this hand-operated pulley, even though he owns a motorized blade as well.
ये हैंडीक्राफ्ट बोलते हैं, ये मशीन हैंडीक्राफ्ट नहीं है।
Work like this, however, comes with a lot of physical risks. The cutters use their bare hands and must get dangerously close to the blade to make sure they get an accurate shape. It can also cause a lot of wear and tear on their skin, even eroding their fingerprints permanently. They are always breathing in marble dust. And while shaping the stones, they often work with water, which can numb their fingers in the cold months, when temperatures in the area can drop to around 4 to 8 degrees Celsius.
ठंड में यहाँ कारीगर कम काम करता है, मतलब जो 12 घंटे काम कर ले तो वो 6-7 घंटे काम कर पाता है, हिम्मत नहीं होती।
Once the stone is cut, another worker will fine-tune the shape and polish it for a smoother edge using an emery wheel. Each cut stone is then lightly glued into the marble. Then artisans scrape an outline around the border to make sure they all fit perfectly. The elephant is heated by the fire so the temporary glue will soften and the stones can be removed to complete the inlay. At this point, they use a variety of pointed metal tools to dig, cut, and scrape out a shallow recess in the marble several millimeters deep. To attach the stones to the marble, the Taj Mahal workers were said to have used a special glue consisting of sugarcane, beeswax, honey, lemon juice, marble dust, and lentils. This type of glue needed to be used right away and would expire quickly. Today, however, there are many synthetic alternatives that last longer and are easier to make. They mix an adhesive called araldite with zinc powder and acrylic paint to create a paste. This will harden while the marble is being prepared. When ready for use, they heat the hardened glue with a hot coal so it's malleable and fill the entire gap in the marble. The stones are pressed one by one into the glue in the originally designed inlay pattern. Once the glue dries, they then use different types of sandpaper and polish pads to bring out the shine and smooth the surface. As they work, the pink dye is wiped away, leaving only white marble and brightly colored stonework. Artisans typically sell pieces like this to showrooms or marketplaces, which then resell them to buyers, many of whom are tourists visiting the Taj Mahal.
ताजमहल के बिना हम ये काम कर नहीं सकते। ताजमहल देखने आता है फॉरेनर तो हमारे ये प्रोडक्ट लेके जाता है।
The COVID-19 pandemic brought tourism to a halt, which led to a downturn in the marble inlay business.
लॉकडाउन में हुआ जब कारीगर जब बेकार हो गए, शोरूम से सब कारोबार था, कुछ शोरूम वगैरह बंद हो गए, तो जब तक काम ही बनता तो फिर वो किसी ना कुछ अलग ये काम वर्क छोड़ दिया.
Arif says he hopes the government will one day open its own showroom and buy directly from artisans to help boost their business. Meanwhile, workers put in a lot of time and effort for little profit. But it's not just a decline in tourism that's a threat to the future of the craft. The job is not as lucrative as it once was, so many young people are opting for other fields.
हमारे दादा के टाइम तक तो बहुत अच्छे पैसे मिलते थे क्योंकि हर चीज़ की सस्ता था। जैसे ही महंगाई बढ़ती चली गई, पैसे इंक्रीज़ नहीं हुए, कारीगरों को नहीं, और जो बना के उनको दे रहा है उनके भी पैसे इंक्रीज़ हुए। तो उससे कारीगरों ने आज की डेट के अंदर जो पहले के सीखे, वो कोई ये काम सीखना चाहता नहीं है, ना अपने औलाद को सिखाना नहीं चाहता, क्योंकि वो चाहता है पढ़ लिख के अपने औलाद को मैं इंजीनियर बनाऊँ या किसी भी उसमें लाऊँ।
These days, Arif's son enjoys watching him work. But Arif says he'd never force him to become a Parchin Kari artist. Others, like Mohammed, don't plan on passing the legacy down to their kids.
अब तो ये कि बहुत कम हो गया है काम ये, पहले ऐसी बात नहीं है, अब कोई सीख भी नहीं रहा है। मेरी दो बेटियां थी, दोनों की शादी हुई, मेरा बेटा भी पढ़ रहा है, पढ़ा रहा है, ये काम नहीं सिखाएंगे।
New workers are entering the trade, Arif says, but they are choosing simpler work that requires less training, like creating larger wall pieces or those with less stone.
ये तो हाथ से ही शेप देके जो बारीक काम है ना, ये इसी से ही बनता है.
And the production of small, highly detailed pieces, the intoxicating work that's been passed down from generation to generation, is in danger of being lost forever. But their creations will last for years, just as the Taj Mahal has withstood the test of time.
मगर वो कारीगर नहीं रहा होगा जो जिसे आर्ट पीस जो बना सके, जिसे आर्ट पीस कह सके। फिर सिर्फ वो कारीगर रहेगा कि भाई मुझे 2 पैसे कहाँ से ज़्यादा मिल रहे हैं और मैं कैसे कम करूँ।
In their liquid form, pastels look just like paint. But Margaret's goal is to drain the moisture, turning this bright blue blob into some of the most renowned pastel sticks on the market. La Maison du Pastel, founded by Henri Rocher, has been making them the same way for 300 years. These drawers store hundreds upon hundreds of colors, with only slight variations between shades. Some only a trained eye can see. But a premium pastel business is hard to sustain. Pastels aren't as popular as other fine art mediums like oil paint. So for years, the business struggled to find and keep its customer base. Today, its 2 co-owners work tirelessly to keep this centuries-old tradition alive without sacrificing the quality the Maison is known for. So how is this niche art business still standing? Isabelle Rocher, a relative of Henri Rocher, and Margaret Zayer are the company's only 2 employees. They make new pastel sticks a lot like the old ones, starting with pigment and a binder, based on a secret formula that took Rocher and his son decades to develop.
People like Whistler, Redon, Degas, Sisley, who all had issues with the medium. They were having problems with the powder sticking to the paper. They were having mold on their works. So Henri Rocher brought all of his scientific skills to try and remedy and bring them the product that they were looking for.
So the base of this new color is cerulean blue, which is a very classic pigment.
This new color, Caribbean blue, will join more than 1,900 others the Maison offers. It's the biggest selection in the company's history, maybe even the biggest selection of pastels ever. So adding new colors to the mix takes a discerning eye and skilled hands. That's where Margaret comes in. She's the creative force behind the business.
If the sun's out and we don't feel like working, we don't work. Or if the sun's out and it inspires us to make a beautiful color, we do that.
After the initial color is set, Isabelle and Margaret divide it into 9 gradations, from dark to light, so artists can find the exact shade they need.
So I'm essentially aiming to go between those 2. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Margaret, I started with 1.5 spoons of the dark. I think I'm going to be making masses already.
Throughout its centuries-long history, the Maison was renowned for its unmatched range of colors. This is especially important for pastel artists, who can't just mix 2 pastels together to make a new color before putting it to paper.
You can't blend pastel on a palette like a painter might, but if you really want to make a line of a color, you need to have a stick of that color.
That blending needs to happen at the very beginning of a pastel's life instead.
I'm actually not far from where I want to be, which is really magical. I'm going to mix it, I really mix it in before I compare. So I'm actually right now a bit darker than I want to be, so I'm going to add a bit of white.
If the paste is too stiff, you can't integrate the white and the color very easily, but by bringing it to a sort of cake batter consistency, they merge quite well.
When they're satisfied with the color, Isabelle scoops the mixture onto a terracotta roof tile to dry.
We use the tiles because that's how it was done in the past, but the advantage of the tiles is they're porous.
The tiles absorb a bunch of the moisture, creating less work for Margaret when she will put the mixture through their antique press. After the paste has adequately dried, Margaret wraps it in a cloth and uses an antique press to gradually squeeze the moisture from the paste.
This is a tool that was there when Isabelle took over the Maison. I would imagine it's been used for quite a long time.
Yeah, essentially a lot of what we're surrounded with are tools and drawers that date back 150 years. And it's as well, it gives us this sense of âme in French, I'm not sure how you say that in English, a spirit, a soul.
Margaret joined Isabelle at the Maison in 2010 after a visit to the shop. She sent a cold email inquiring about a summer job and ended up finding her calling.
I would have been happy just cleaning the shop, so I didn't expect an invitation to come to the house and make the pastels with her.
The way I see it is I allowed the business to survive, and today I'm giving Margaret a sort of structure within which she can really make the craft live.
And by the end of this, we'll probably end up with something more consistent with modeling clay cookie dough. This is one of those points in the process, though, where you might want to just sort of muscle it, but you actually have to be quite attentive. There's certain colors that lose water quite quickly that you can easily overpress, and it's always more complicated adding water back. Oh, that's better. Isa? Okay, I'm coming over with the paste.
Hand rolling each pastel allows them to add more pigment to the mix than if they used a machine.
We tolerate certain consistencies that machines can't tolerate. We end up with colors that are either more vibrant or deeper or more concentrated. To me, it's always been the phase of the making that I prefer. It's sort of the moment when you're actually forming them, so you're starting to see it happening and becoming a pastel. When you don't know how to roll them, you can end up with pancakes. The first pastels I made just didn't look like anything. They were all weird shapes, and they were flat, they had holes in them.
The cutting with the large blade, I believe that was also and the invention of Henri Gaucher to the traditional process, because I think in the past they used to cut the sticks once they were dry, which took forever. So it's cutting the ends in one fell swoop.
When Isabel took over the company for her aging aunts in 2000, she held on to many of the tools and techniques that Rocher developed in his day.
And then we let them air dry, usually for about 3 weeks. Depends on the season, depends on the colors.
But there was also plenty about the languishing business that needed to change. When she took over, the Maison had next to no inventory and hardly any customers to sell it to.
My great aunts were in their 80s when I took over, which means that for the last 20 years they hadn't made much. They were very secretive, so they hadn't tried to generate new customers. So essentially their customer base, as the artists had grown older and died, they hadn't been replaced.
So she spent her first 2 years regenerating supply.
I'd managed to reconstitute about 250 or 300 colors
before focusing on demand. The Maison serves what's known as a niche market. Imagine the market as a pie. While a mass market company like Crayola tries to carve the biggest slice by appealing to as many people as possible, businesses serving niche markets cut smaller, specialty slices that appeal to a specific type of customer. A huge reason for Rocher's success was how he collaborated with artists to create the colors they needed. And Isabel was determined to do the same.
The most difficult thing for me was that I had no art background at all. I had no artistic background either. I didn't draw, I didn't paint. So when I was talking to the artists, I felt I was talking a different language.
One of these artists is Claude Barré-Allard.
I've known her since the day I took over. I think that the first color I made was a bleu indigo, an indigo blue, that she'd been waiting for 2 years.
Did she tell you that she was creating colors for me?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. That makes me very proud, for sure. That means that they like what I can do with their colors, for sure. They serve me, I serve them. It's an exchange, as in life.
Claude picked up pastels later in her career, after spending most of it working with oil paints.
I bought the Pastel Rocher very slowly in the beginning, and I discovered that I sold much more with the Pastel Rocher because the work became much better, because the quality of pigments was wonderful.
Historically, pastels have taken a back seat to more popular mediums like oil paints.
You have waves of it being used extensively, and then it goes back into being a secondary medium that people only use, to do basic drawings and etc. We are aware that, it comes and goes, and at the moment we feel that a few artists are really picking up the technique and doing really serious things with it, not just preparatory drawings. I walked into this thinking there are just maybe a handful or maybe 10 artists in France that really need the pastels. If I can multiply that by the number of countries around the world, I should be able to make a living out of it.
Isabel inherited an archive of century-old pigment, some of which is still usable. Sometimes, Margaret can even reach into the company's past to make new pastel colors.
Oh, that's beauty. It's a really beautiful ochre, actually. Actually, I'm processing this in real time. That I really like this pigment. This is a genuine discovery. Well, I kind of want to see what kind of a pastel this makes. I imagine because it's an ochre, it will make an agreeable texture. I want to compare this to ochres that we already have in the range to see if I'd actually kind of. Do you mind if I go get a piece of paper and a bit of white?
Sure.
While much of the process remains the same as when Rocher ran things, what Isabel and Margaret really hold on to is how he thought about the business.
What really makes, our pastels what they are is his formulas and how they marry to the craftsmanship of the artisan that he met.
Avec les pastels Rocher, c'est une ascension, quoi. On progresse dans la pose de la couleur et ça c'est essentiel parce que, dans mon travail c'est essentiel.
I know that Margaret has in her head several other ranges that she wants to bring in, and on paper she already knows that one day we will go above 2,000. But essentially, as long as we keep having people coming to the shop asking for colors they don't have, we're going to be bringing in new things.
This is the rarest pasta in the world. The key to making sufilindeu, or threads of God, is stretching and folding dough over and over and over again until it turns into 256 even strands. For a century, the techniques were practiced by a single family in the Sardinian city of Nuoro, who made the dish solely for religious celebration. Now, Luca Floris is one of only 7 locals making it here.
Poco tempo fa il filindeu a Nuoro era off limit anche per i nuoresi.
This secrecy nearly led to the pasta's disappearance. But now it's finding new producers and customers abroad. This new audience could save the rare pasta from extinction. But will this expansion also strip away the cultural and religious significance of the dish? We went to Italy to see how the tradition of making threads of God is still standing. Although making sufilindeu is complex, the ingredients are simple: semolina flour, water, and salt. Luca mixes them together to form a dough.
Io fin da piccolo ero il classico bambino che quando vedevo mamma impastare, qualsiasi cosa lei facesse, ero sempre in mezzo. E poi per farmi stare buono mi davano un pezzo di pasta impastata e mi facevano giocare. Piano piano ho iniziato a lavorare, a fare un po' tutto.
Getting the dough completely smooth can take up to 20 minutes.
È una pasta che ha tante varianti, il clima, l'umidità, il caldo, e lì devi essere bravo a capire quando dare più acqua, quando darne di meno.
He alternates between adding drops of salt brine and fresh water as he needs.
Sembrano solo frasi fatte, ma è vero, la pasta la senti cambiare, la pasta quasi parla con te e ti dice ok, sono pronta. Al tatto deve sentirsi liscio e vellutato.
Stretching is the key to sufilindeu's thin strands. In one swift motion, Luca folds the dough in half to make 2 pieces, then 4, then 8. He continues until he forms 256 perfectly even threads of pasta. Each one is as thin as a strand of hair.
Non esiste macchinario per fare filindeu, è una pratica che può essere fatta solo ed esclusivamente con le mani.
Luca has to be careful not to break any of the strands as he places them on a traditional wicker base called a fundu. It's made of asphodel, a plant that grows throughout the region.
L'asfodelo ha la grande capacità di aiutare nell'essiccazione la pasta e poi di dare anche un sapore in più a quello che sarà poi il risultato finale una volta cucinato.
Layering is the key to sufilindeu's mesh-like design. It's also the trickiest step of the process for Luca. The strands cannot be moved once they are on the fundu, so he has to be precise. He removes any excess dough from the edges before working on the next section.
È importante essere i più veloci possibili, in quanto lo strato inferiore si va a attaccare a quello superiore. Se lo strato inferiore è asciutto, quello superiore non si attacca e quindi in fase di cottura si disfa.
Luca only has 20 minutes to finish all 3 layers.
Questo è il lavoro ultimato.
For the people of Nuado, su filindeyu is sacred. Traditionally, the dish was prepared only twice a year during celebrations to honor St. Francis. Pilgrims from Nuado would travel 20 miles to his shrine. Women from a local family would gather and prepare bowls of su filindeyu for those who completed the trek.
Tradizionale è cucinarlo con un brodo di pecora e condirlo con del formaggio pecorino fresco fatto inacidire.
This hasn't changed since at least the 19th century.
Su filindeyu è vero, era un lavoro prettamente femminile, o meglio, una lavorazione prettamente femminile.
But generations of secrecy have left only a handful of people in Nuado with the knowledge and interest to make the dish. In 2021, a su filindeyu maker from the family divulged the recipe to other women in the community in an effort to keep the dish from disappearing. Other Nuado residents like Luca stepped in to keep the tradition alive. But for him, finding a teacher was impossible.
Non avendo ricevuto risposte positive dalle persone a cui avevo chiesto di insegnarmelo.
Luca decided to take matters into his own hands.
Perché devono farlo solo le donne?
Slowly, Luca started getting inquiries from chefs in Canada, England, China, Germany, and beyond.
Questa dimostrazione che è una pasta richiestissima e conosciutissima anche oltre confini nazionali, non solo della nostra isola.
Over 6,000 miles away outside of Los Angeles, one of Luca's students is bringing a new life to su filindeyu. Chef Rob Gentile has spent over 20 years bringing the flavors of his Italian background to fine dining restaurants in Canada and the US.
It was always this, holy grail of pasta. I always wanted to learn how to make it. It's just one of those things. It's like, before I die, I want to know how to make su filindeyu.
For years, Rob struggled to find a teacher. But when the masters in Nuado finally began sharing their knowledge, he jumped at the opportunity.
It started to become how do we keep this tradition alive? How do we encourage the people who are excited about it to foster this amazing product? And this is where I met Luca.
Rob spent hours watching and learning how to knead and stretch the dough in Luca's home.
I was like, I can do this. It's not that difficult, because Luca made it look so easy. It was a very memorable moment my entire life. It was couldn't even believe this.
Now Rob is featuring su filindeyu on the menu at his restaurant, Stella West Hollywood.
I just felt like it was something special that people needed to try. And every time I've introduced someone to it, it's a magical thing to eat.
As su filindeyu expands to restaurants outside of Sardinia, awareness of the dish's cultural and religious significance could fade over time. But Luca and Rob believe that shouldn't stop people from sharing how to make it.
Purtroppo non tutti sono d'accordo a insegnarlo fuori, però io ho sempre detto che portare fuori questa pasta non toglie nulla alla paternità della pasta stessa.
I think that it can be appreciated as a technique in a pasta, and we could do things like zuppa de pesce with it and have fun with it, but it can also be celebrated as the religious tradition that it is. It's an exciting time for su filindeyu because it's never really been anywhere else outside of Sardinia, and now it is.
And though the pasta is finding new homes, the tradition is still under threat in its birthplace. That's because to make the pasta the authentic way, you need a fundu. And there are not that many people left making them.
In questo momento stiamo andando a Olsai a far visita a una delle ultime maestre dell'intreccio dell'asfodelo. Permesso? Si può? Ciao.
Giovanna Porci has been weaving since she was a small child.
Io ho iniziato a fare l'asfodelo perché quando si alzava mamma che andava a fare qualche cosa, io di nascosto andavo e facevo qualche pezzettino, no? Però lei se ne accorgeva subito che lo doveva disfare, che io non lo facevo bene.
She starts by cutting the asphodel into thin strips. This tool is made from cow bone. Giovanna uses it to weave the plant into a round base. In Sardinia, women have passed down asphodel weaving for generations. It was a source of income for people like Giovanna's mother.
Paesi d'intorno, nei dintorni, andava a vendere i cestini, questi che ci sono attaccati al muro. Quindi faceva questo lavoro per guadagnare i soldi, per dare da mangiare ai suoi figli.
But today the trade has virtually disappeared, with only a few weavers remaining.
Infatti ancora oggi non mi spiego com'è possibile che una tradizione che ha fruttato così tanto alle persone stia andando piano piano a morire, a spegnersi.
Giovanna says young people haven't shown any interest in learning the craft. She's tried to teach women in her community, but she says it hasn't caught on.
E va nei mercati a vendere, già li vende, solo che non c'è chi li fa. Non è rimasto più nessuno. Non lo so, io sono orgogliosa di farlo, perché mi piace. Però sono stanca anch'io, capito?
Like weaving, the art of making sufilindeyu in Nuoro is anything but widespread.
Nel senso che essendo poche le persone che lo producono, hai difficoltà a produrlo in quantità.
This limited production has also made the pasta expensive. 1 kilo can cost 26 to 30 euros, around 15 times the average price of pasta in Italy. But Luca doesn't believe selling it is the key to keeping this tradition alive.
Una pasta sacra è legata quindi a San Francesco, a un santo che ha fatto un voto di povertà, e non mi sembra moralmente corretto e giusto fare dei soldi su questa pasta.
Instead, his focus is teaching it to others, and he's putting his faith in people like Rob to bring the dish worldwide.
They're part of culture, they're part of a cuisine. It's just something that should be taught, it should be carried on, it should move forward.
Che essendo comunque la Sardegna una terra ricca di tradizione, sarebbe fantastico che domani ci si svegliasse e magari qualcuno è venuto all'idea di introdurre queste tradizioni e poterle insegnare nelle scuole.
While Luca doesn't know what the future holds, he's proud of the work he's doing to keep Threads of God alive. It takes 150 kilograms of the best quality green tea leaves and some skilled footwork to produce 1 day's worth of kejek tea. Kejek is central to the Nyanut tea ritual that dates back at least a century in Indonesia. But there's a problem. Over 56,000 acres have disappeared in the last 19 years, as fewer people see tea making as a viable career. The plantation decrease threatens thousands of jobs and a ritual meant to bring Indonesia's Sundanese people together.
Karunya gitu banyak keneh anu membutuhkeun gitu. Nu membutuhkan. Seueur keneh nu preogieun gitu buat minuman, buat minuman teh.
We went to Cigadug village in West Java, Indonesia, to see how kejek tea is still standing in a struggling tea industry. Most tea leaf harvesting is still done manually by pickers like Iip. She's been gathering and selling tea leaves for the past 10 years.
Saya iya lah batas kumanya
anu jangkung geningan. Terus anu pucukna lebar. Saya yang ini. Ini udah layak dipetik. Yang ini.
Leaves from the topmost shoots are what give kejek tea its slightly bitter taste. Iip can collect up to 30 kilograms of leaves in a day. The leaves Iip picks go to tea producers like Apandi Oos. He's been doing this work for over 5 decades.
Drama abdi mah. Pan kapungkur masih orang ngagiling, Rama ngagiling. Saya apa mah ngalantrah ke budak tebangor di batur mantuan. Tadi Raman ya jangan hajas, Haji Komar. Kapungkur apa ente dibere buruhan ge atoh supaya bere dahar we.
In the 1970s and 80s, Apandi says his family's tea factory, Kajek Pa Oos, was one of hundreds in his district of Garut producing tea. Today, it's the last one standing. Apandi starts by sorting the leaves.
Nya pucukna jantan pucukna pucuk prosesna sortiran pucukna anu sae kitu nya. Anu sae pucukna. Jantan ari teh kajek mah pucukna kadah anu sae. Ari kana buat panggilingan itu mah pucuk abersan gitu.
Only the best tea leaves will be roasted in this 32-year-old cauldron. He and his team have to constantly toss the leaves around to prevent them from sticking together. Roasting helps release the leaves' natural oils. For most of Apandi's career, this step was only done over an open fire. But in 2018, he invested in a roasting machine.
Jantan upami kadinya mah pan, karena sangrayan mah ku 5 kilo, tapi kadinya mah 50 kilo. Jantannya lebih gitu. Ya 30 menitnya. Proses sama 30 menit.
Roasting makes the tea leaves more pliable, which is essential for the next phase. Stepping on the tea leaves is what sets kejek tea apart from other teas. And it's how the tea got its name. Kejek means to step on in Indonesia.
Punya awalnya mah apa mah teu nyebut teh kejek intinya. Awal teh kejek teh anu ninggal bet dijejak can kitu. Dijejak.
Apandi spends 15 minutes stepping and squeezing up to 5 kilograms of leaves.
Tanah keluar gitu.
This sap is what gives kejek tea its characteristic color. Some say it also gives the tea a distinctive flavor and aroma compared to other teas.
Capek mah masing kaya anu teu capek lah. Aya wae capek mah gitu. Nya ari menurut Bapak mah nya aya nu ngabutuhkeun.
He roasts the leaves one more time before they are ready to sell. Apandi works with vendors who sell the tea at the local market.
Yang ia mengantar kliennya ke pasar. Itu ke Pak Haji nya. Nah itu. Ke Pak Haji we. Luak Rio kata.
Tea plants were first brought to Indonesia in the 17th century, but it wasn't until 1828 that tea plantations were established throughout the country. The industry grew quickly, and by the early 20th century, Indonesian tea was exported throughout Europe, gaining popularity for its premium quality. But in recent decades, aging tea plantations have been producing lower quality tea leaves. As a result, many farmers switched to growing more profitable crops like vegetables and trees for palm oil. Between 2001 and 2020, the area of tea plantations in Indonesia decreased by nearly 14%. The decline in tea fields means an uncertain future for 300,000 people who work in Indonesia's tea industry, including pickers like Iip.
Awon ya kondisi nak teh jantan naonnya teh seueur di balong ka di tanaman ku bangsa palawija seperti engkol ka itu terus ieu kentang enten teh aya di nanti kanggo teh teh ai petani sareng ieu mah ato pengen teh aya teh nang halangan ai kana ngun marartik mah jantan teh aya pakasabanu sanes kana metik anu seueur kana ieu cai teh jantan ngirang seueur teh kana teh ieu.
Less tea, as well as a lack of governmental support, access to new technology, and education around the best agricultural practices have led to a drop in the quality of the leaves.
Kirang dorongan mah teu digalakeun pan teu paeun pan kana teh aya bantosan binihna gitu. Aya bantosan permodalanana aya mah teu aya.
Berkembang ayana pasihan bibitna pentan kana masyarakat anu aralit diageungkeun kitu naranem ieu teh ngarah henteu naon yang henteu aya kitu henteu kosong pisan kitu teh.
Apandi says these challenges mean it's not viable to produce tea every day. He's turned to working other jobs like herding sheep and growing vegetables to make ends meet. Apandi is also helping preserve another tradition in Garut. The Nyanut tradition is a tea-drinking ritual that's been practiced by Indonesia's Sundanese ethnic group for generations. And it's one Dasep Badru Salam has been practicing for a decade. He's been buying kejek tea from Apandi since 2016. He says he buys it for its supposed health benefits.
Nah, Abi lebih nganjurkan enteh tubruk we lah, enteh dikemas di kumargi, kadar manfaatna kurang lamun ku enteh celup gitu.
To make the tea, Dasep boils the water on a traditional clay stove called a hawu, then pours it into a teapot containing the leaves. But the Nyanut tradition is not only about how one makes the tea. There are rules for how to drink it, too.
Dina proses nyanut teh, nyata kahiji diputar searah putaran jarum jam, searah putaran, satu helaan napas lahnya, satu helaan napas, 2 kali putaran, setengah putaran kan, nah, 2 kali diputar, anu salajengna nyaeta dihirup 3 kali hirupan.
According to tradition, these steps help the body properly receive all the benefits from the tea. Nyanut tradition has been used to bring communities together for generations. Dasep also believes it could be the key to saving West Java's tea industry. He hosts a yearly festival aimed at preserving Nyanut tradition for locals and promoting it to tourists. Apandi's kejek tea plays a central role in the festival.
Abdi ngelestarikeun tradisi Nyanut nu supados enteh wanohkeun deui eta kantan upami aya kampung Nyanut. Nah, pribados sareng reng-rengan di komunitas budaya khususnya masyarakat Cigedug kanggo ngagalahkeun deui nanam entehna.
As for Apandi, he plans to continue making tea as long as he can.
Ada apa masih kena aya nu ngabutuhkeun materasi gitu. Bapak menyalah ti belat we kitunya. Jadi naon teh lah asana teu tega kitunya. Nya pangsiuna mah reung kewe meureun geus.
Before casting this sculpture in bronze, Ebua Fred Iyama covers it with the red earth of Nigeria's Benin city. These Benin bronzes are made the same way Fred's ancestors crafted them more than 500 years ago. The artifacts have been in the news recently as calls grow louder to return the bronzes, which were looted and housed in museums across the Western world. While more and more of these bronzes are being returned, only about 40 artisans remain making new sculptures today. And they worry the craft won't survive much longer.
I don't think there is hope for the craftsmen in the next 30 years.
They say the problem is Nigeria's government will invest in the return of stolen Benin bronzes, but they're not investing enough in today's bronze casters. We went to Benin City to see how this craft is still standing, and if artists can keep it that way for much longer. To make a Benin bronze, Fred starts off by creating the core of the piece, a rough mold out of the red earth from Igun Street. This quarter was once bustling with craftsmen, but today it's left with only a few dozen. They make up the Royal Guild of Bronze Casters. Fred is one of these craftsmen, carrying on the legacy of his ancestors.
Our ancestors labored for it. They worked for it. Our ancestors took time and effort in doing it to keep our history and heritage. Now is our turn. We should try to preserve it for the younger generation to see, so that it will not die in our hand.
The core is made of red earth from the same area bronze craftsmen have used for centuries. This statue is Fred's interpretation of the various busts of Oba Esigi, or King Esigi, the ruler of the Benin Kingdom in the early 16th century. He'll craft the bronze with the same techniques the original craftsmen used.
I'm trying to soften the wax because there is no sun to make the wax. Since there is fire here, instead of we waiting for sun, we have to use this method.
When the wax is soft enough, Fred covers the core with it and turns his attention to the more intricate details of the art piece. He does this the traditional way, with a cow bone.
For the traditional people, they use this one, not spatula, or as we call it now. What I'm trying to do now is to make them to become one. That's the big bead that is in the upper snake. Is what I'm trying to form now.
The purpose of Benin bronzes has always been to record history, like a depiction of an important event or something as simple as a king's unique style of dress.
The Gun light are historians. The Gun people, our ancestors, are historians. Not just telling the story, they molded everything. They mold each event. The only way they document it is by molding it.
Now that the details of the bust are complete, Fred covers it in layers of wet red earth. Some of Fred's earliest memories are playing with this red powdery soil.
Any new baby that is being given birth to, as he's growing, the red sand is always around him, and most of the red sand, while we begin from kids begin to fall in love with it. That's the craftsmanship. As you are playing with it, the spirit comes inside you.
As Fred is finishing up, he inserts at the base of the piece 2 bones, around which he forms an outlet where the melted wax will escape. Fred leaves the piece to dry overnight. The next day, Fred prepares the mold for firing.
We want to guide and bind the artwork before taking to the oven so that it won't destroy. To protect the work, we need to tie with bandy wire.
Every part of the mold is covered except for the outlet. Now, Fred can put it in the fire. This is where the meticulous preparation pays off. The wax around the inner core melts off and escapes through the outlet, creating a space between the layers of hardened soil in the shape of oba esigi. This is called lost wax casting. For Fred, the ingenuity of the technique continues to inspire him.
Some of us, sometimes we take time to wonder, is it our ancestors that did this thing? But the reason why we are convinced is when we see ourselves doing it. But what wonders us about our ancestors is that what prompted that idea? What were they thinking that made them to come up with this thing?
Fred melts these odds and ends into liquid bronze. He pours the metal into the outlet, filling the space left vacant by the wax melting. The molten bronze cools down and takes shape.
See, we are done with the casting, and right now we're about to pull out every job that we have casted today.
Fred hacks away at the outer layers, each blow from the hammer revealing lustrous bronze underneath. When he's done, he hands it over to Sasa for filing and polishing.
I'm an expert in filing. I've been in this filing for more than 15 years.
Sasa learned this work from his brother. It's the only step in the process that is modernized. He uses rasps to scrape away at the leftover hardened sand. Sasa picks at every crevice, making sure not to damage the artwork.
What I like most about filing is carving. To carve it out, the designs, the face, and everything will look great.
Using a polishing machine, Sasa buffs the bronze to a perfect sheen.
This piece now tells us about Oba Esigi and his costume of his dressing.
The techniques Fred and Sasa use were developed as early as the 1200s. Back then, bronze casters were noblemen in the Kingdom of Benin, which predates the modern-day nations of Nigeria and Benin. Bronze casters could spend months working on a single piece. But 1897 was a turning point. The chiefs of Benin resisted British commercial involvement and staged an ambush on a trading expedition, killing British soldiers. In retaliation, the British pillaged the Oba's palace, stealing thousands of valuable pieces, including Benin bronzes. That February, the British captured the Kingdom of Benin, and the looted sculptures were auctioned off across Europe. As a result, museums in Benin City have very little to show for their history.
This is what has projected the Benin Kingdom to the outside world. Welcome to National Museum Benin. You can see them. They even have some in between their legs, behind them. All those are the objects, and these are all plaques. And he's having a fun of himself with his cigar in his mouth and looking at the photographer. So all these collections, most of them went to the world through the British Museum, and some of them are still there till date, and we wish they would send them back to where they belong.
Over a century later, public opinion started to change, with advocates calling to return looted artifacts back to their original homes.
Within that period of about 127 years, it was like we are in trauma. We were being disturbed because part of our history, part of our body had been taken out. But as it's now coming back, we believe that we are now full.
Nigeria has been requesting the return of these artworks since the 1970s. Its efforts began to pay off in October 2021, when the University of Cambridge became the first institution to return a Benin bronze to Nigeria. Since then, the United States has returned 30 bronzes, Germany 22, and the UK 8. But this is a drop in the bucket compared to the 5,000 bronzes stolen in 1897. Fred says bronze casters like him avoid going to the Museum of Benin because it forces them to confront this dark time in their history.
Anytime we come here, what comes to our mind is the thing, the invention, because there was so many bronze that were being stolen during the invasion by the British. Anytime we come to this place, it reminds us of what was stolen from the palace. And these are the reasons why normally we don't come to this museum.
But in the next few years, Fred will be able to see some of those stolen bronzes up close at the planned Edo Museum of West African Art. It will cost an estimated $100 million, with part of the funding coming from the state of Edo, where Benin City is located.
But looking at the return of these objects to Nigeria and maybe to Benin is a thing of joy to us. It's a thing that we know that can actually promote our culture the more and promote tourism in Africa, in Nigeria, and in Benin especially.
But with so much attention being given to the return of the historical bronzes and the tourism they may promote, Fred says today's craftsmen are being neglected.
The state of this nation is not helping the craftsmen. And the government, nobody is helping the craftsmen. Everything we are doing, we are just surviving.
Even though Igun Street has been recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1999, its artisans are struggling to preserve the renowned craft.
Sometimes you're here in the news, this is what the UN or this World Heritage Center are trying to do to preserve the sculpture or the art or the craft. But none of them will come to the craftsman. For that, without the government involving, I don't think there is hope for the craftsmen in the next 30 years.
The original bronze casters weren't faced with these pressures. They were appointed into guilds by the Oba, who would provide them with materials like bronze. Benin City's craftsmen are looking for the same support today.
They are importing the goods. The bronze we are using, they are importing all. They decide the sales of bronze, not we. Once they said a kilo of bronze is 30,000 naira, how would the bronze caster continue? It will be hard for them to continue. But when the government takes charge, then the things will be easier for the craftsmen because they will not be financing the material.
We reached out to several agencies within the Nigerian and Edo state governments, but did not receive a response. Fred's main customers are tourists and local art dealers. He says profits are not enough to sustain his workshop. He does most of his sales through middlemen.
We sell for like $300, $400 to a seller also. Then that one to go and sell to the end user can be $5,000, can be $2,000.
Fred recommends buyers source directly from the craftsmen until they receive financial support.
The place is an open place. Come direct, see for yourself. Know what they are writing or what they are telling people outside. You come to the source, you see for yourself, see what the craftsmen, what they are going through. That's the only thing I felt that will save this work.
Saving the craft from extinction is so personal for Fred because he comes from a line of bronze casters dating back to the 15th century. His family name, Iyama, is a title bestowed by the king.
Welcome, this is my house. Come, let me show you something. As you can see, this is my father. This picture is like 40-something years ago. Everything that I do now concerning this craft I learned from my father.
This piece is one of Fred's greatest inspirations. He helped his father create this interpretation of a stolen original, which is held at the Princeton University Art Museum in New Jersey.
Something like this that is so beautiful and unique. I feel very good because I know in 100 years or 50 years to come, if this documentary is still retained as it is, my work will be remembered. But I feel good that I'm among they that are preserving the culture and the artwork for now, that of which the younger generation will see the works of my hand as I have seen my ancestors own. For that I feel very good and excited.
It takes 2 to 4 people working together to create an authentic Chris dagger. Subandi Suponingrat has been making them for 42 years. His assistant, Agus, has been making them for 4 years. And Subandi's newest apprentice, his son Dano, has been at it for just 5 months. But seeing younger Chris makers is a rare sight in Indonesia.
Khawatir pemahaman masyarakat terhadap budaya bangsa ini kan semakin juga berkurang kan.
New Chris makers are so rare that the United Nations gave the craft intangible cultural heritage status as a safeguard. The Indonesian government now pays Subandi to teach young people how to make the daggers. But is it too little, too late? We visited Subandi's Chris workshop to see how this traditional craft is still standing. Arif Usman, a retired teacher, is visiting Subandi at his workshop in Solo, Central Java.
Keris untuk dari leluhur kita, jadinya kita harus punya lah.
This style of dagger is centuries old. Its use as a weapon is immortalized on the walls of Hindu temples dating back to the 9th century. Over time, it became a physical reminder of Javanese history, and people maintained the belief that the daggers connected them to the spiritual world. Now, the kris is incorporated into weddings and funerals, and is passed down as an heirloom that connects modern generations to past ones.
Oh, saya percaya. Apalagi kita orang untuk pegangan di rumah supaya keluarga adem ayem gitu.
But before forging can begin, an empu has to perform certain rituals. As part of his preparation, he consumes only rice and water for 3 days, a period of fasting known as muti.
Karena apa? Tuhan itu tidak memberikan kita semuanya tidak gratis. Harus ada lakunya.
Before he begins, an assortment of offerings is prepared by his daughter, Seppa. While not directly involved in making daggers, she has focused her master's photography thesis on kris.
Kalau untuk saat ini sih belum, mungkin suatu saat nanti pengen dibikinin Bapak sesuai dengan karakteristik saya sebagai turunan leluhur atau sebagai mungkin doa dari Bapak untuk saya ke depannya. Mungkin seperti itu sih.
Yang baik mestinya tahapan-tahapan yang pembuatan. Oh ini misalnya berdoa, tidak hanya sekedar ucapan saja, juga nganggo menggagai puasa laku, nama orang Jawa itu laku.
The physical process begins with a fire, which can reach temperatures of up to 1200 degrees Celsius. Using teak charcoal as the base.
Nempah, soalnya panasnya itu.
Subandi's 23-year-old son, Dano, hopes to take over the family business one day. He's one of a handful of apprentices in the workshop, but training a new generation of empus is proving difficult. Danar says he, like a lot of young people in Indonesia, had no desire at first to become a kris master.
Dulu sebelumnya sih nggak ada sama sekali ketertarikan masuk dunia keris. Sebenarnya 5 bulan baruan. Soalnya sebelumnya saya bekerja di tempat resto Solo. Karena juga ingin nerusin usaha bapak, karena anak satu-satunya juga, pengen berusaha bahagiain bapak.
Subandi begins by heating a single slab of iron. Folding it in half and inserting a thin piece of nickel. He then hammers the two metals together into one mass. There are two basic shapes to a kris, curved and straight.
Tipe look 3 yang pamornya bagus.
A curved dagger usually has an odd number of curves, or looks. The pamor is the swirly pattern that forms on the surface of the blade as a result of welding together layers and layers of iron and nickel. Part of being considered a master is knowing how many layers of nickel and iron to use to create the pamor pattern the buyer wants.
Nah, soal jumlahnya, kita menyesuaikan bentuk pamor yang akan diinginkan. Jadi setiap pamor itu belum tentu, artinya tidak sama lapisannya.
He heats up the metal again in the fire until it glows red hot. Danar and the others then take turns hammering the molten metal together. The mass is then heated and folded in half again. They repeat this over and over, multiplying the number of layers with each fold. A laborious and time-consuming process.
Paling memuaskan itu keluar kembang apinya itu.
The multi-layered piece is folded once more before steel is welded into the core. At this point, Subandi will either hammer in the basic curves or leave it straight, depending on the desired shape. Finally, he immerses the dagger in water adorned with a ceremonial blend of flowers known as Kembang 7 Rupa. This process quenches and hardens the newly forged steel. Now it's time to shape and furrow the blade. This is the most difficult part of the process, according to Subandi's apprentice, Agus.
Karena kalau kita salah sedikit dah jadi.
Subandi uses tools like an emery wheel or a grindstone to sharpen the edges and carve out the final design of the pamor. Danar is learning how to do this detailing, which has already resulted in a trip to the hospital.
Kebetulan kemarin waktu saya ngerinda itu ada gram besi yang masuk ke mata. Dan akhirnya memutuskan ke dokter mata dan alhamdulillah sudah sembuh.
To accentuate the pamor design, Subandi brushes the blade with a liquid mixture containing arsenic.
Nah, untuk memunculkan yang di Jawa itu terkenal dengan warangan itu, memunculkan itu adalah menggunakan asam.
The sheath and handles are carved from other materials like wood, bone or metal. The material of the handle can affect the final price. Most of Subandi's customers are local Javanese people like Arif, who are familiar with kris culture. Subandi says demand for authentic crisp daggers is growing. The problem is there simply aren't enough people qualified to make them.
Selama ini, akhir-akhir ini, setiap bulan ada.
There are not many traditional empus like Subandi left in the country, which is why he is determined to pass on the skills to younger generations, like his son, Daggers. But Subandi says there is still a lot to learn before Daggers can become an empu.
Ya karena tidak menjamin saya menjadi kemampuan. Tadi harus dari Bapak Empu itu adalah kemampuan.
Subandi started learning to make daggers in 1979 at the suggestion of the chairman of the Indonesian Classical Arts Academy, who was interested in reinvigorating crisp production.
Selamat siang, Mas. Monggo, ini Mas Joko.
Subandi went on to teach at the state-run Indonesian Institute of the Arts Surakarta, where he trains younger apprentices. Muhammad is a student in the crisp program Subandi teaches. Both he and his classmate Joko say they want to become empus one day.
Yaitu di kalangan anak muda sekarang kan sudah meninggalkan tradisi-tradisinya, yaitu terutama di berkerisan. Mempertahankan budaya berkerisan.
Masyarakat yang mencintai budaya, apalagi sekarang bahwa budaya asli Indonesia kan juga mendapat tekanan-tekanan dari luar. Mungkin juga ada istilah mungkin atau mematikan budaya-budaya tradisi bangsa kan gitu ada. Gitu.
Even with recent revitalization efforts, knowledge of how to make crisp daggers is at risk of disappearing as young people choose higher paying jobs in modern industries. In 2005, the United Nations gave crisp daggers intangible cultural heritage status alongside other art forms under threat.
Kita sebagai seniman kalau idealis dengan karya doang kita nggak bisa makan, tetap ke ekonomis.
While Subandi may be one of the only empus left in Solo, his work has had a big impact on the youth around him. And it's not just men looking to become empus.
Pernah angkatan keberapa itu 8 atau ke itu kebanyakan malah perempuan, dari cowoknya lebih banyak ceweknya.
Ada, karena beberapa mahasiswanya Bapak itu sering ke rumah. Suatu saat nanti kalau pengen sih dibikinkan untuk keris wanita biasanya. Namanya cundri, jadi untuk ukurannya lebih kecil.
And students like Muhammad are stepping into the empu role to help keep the tradition alive.
Menurut saya itu kesempatan untuk di kalangan anak muda yang sekarang yang tetap mempertahankan nilai budaya, terutama di Indonesia sendiri. Kan banyak yang harus tetap dilestarikan. Kalau bukan anak-anak muda sekarang, nanti siapa lagi?
Massaging fungus into rice is one of the most crucial steps in making sake. After weeks of being soaked, steamed, and fermented, the mix will turn into junmai, a pure kind of sake that has no added alcohol or sugar. But fewer than 10 brewers make it with a 600-year-old natural fermentation method. Maikotsuji is one of them.
やればやるほどものが応えてくれるというか。
But mass-produced sake made with cheap additives is threatening her business. So what makes this kind of junmai so special? And why is it so rare? Northern Okayama's high-quality rice and groundwater have made it a hub for sake brewing. Gozenshu Brewery has been operating here since 1804. Maiko is the 7th generation of sake brewers in her family.
子供の時は自分の家がお酒を作っているっていうなんかプレッシャーみたいなのがあったんですけど。
The brewery goes through 140 tons of omachi rice every year. Most sake rice varieties are created by crossbreeding other strains. This isn't the case with naturally occurring omachi. It gives the sake an earthy and herbal flavor.
町米っていう地元のお米はすごくこう膨らみがあって旨味の出るお米なんですけど、
The rice arrives at the brewery already milled and polished. Maiko and her team start by washing it thoroughly to get rid of any excess powder. The rice then sits in vats of cold water to soak, and every second is crucial. If it absorbs too much moisture, the rice will be sticky and not good for mold growth. The more polished the rice is, the quicker the water will soak in. Workers spend up to half an hour watching for a subtle colour change. They know it's ready when the outside of the grain turns white. By the next day, the rice is ready for another critical step: steaming. Workers transfer it into barrels called goshiki. In the past, they were made of cedar wood, but those were replaced with aluminium ones in the mid-20th century. Maiko uses this wooden tool to spread the rice evenly. The cloth traps the heat and allows steam to escape. The rice steams for 50 minutes. Then it's time to add one of the most important ingredients, koji mold. It's a type of fungus used in many fermented foods like soy sauce, miso, and vinegar. As the koji grows, it converts the rice starch into sugar. But for that to happen, the rice needs to be kept at a steady temperature. If it gets too hot, the fungus will die. This conveyor belt blows air to cool down the rice as Maiko sprinkles on the koji. Once the mold is added, it's a race to get the rice from the chilly brewery floor to the humid 33 degrees Celsius mold room upstairs. Workers spend an hour and a half massaging the koji into the rice, making sure the mold reaches each and every grain.
この仕事の大変なところはやっぱり体を使う仕事なので。
Maiko never expected to make sake brewing a career. It's always been a male-dominated industry. In 2020, out of the 1,200 sake breweries in Japan, only 20 were run by women.
うちの母親はやっぱり女性だし、大変な仕事っていうのを知ってたので。
It wasn't until Maiko started drinking sake herself that she realized this was the job for her.
この写真は、15年前ぐらいに、私が杜氏になったばっかりの時の写真です。みんな本当に若かったので、経験もない中で本当に一生懸命もう無我夢中でお酒作りをやってた、なんかそういう思い出があります。
Maiko and her team wrap the rice in cloth to keep it warm and humid. After 2 days, they pour it through a grinder to smooth out any clumps. The next step, called bodaimoto, sets Maiko's brewery apart from the competition. While most sake brewers today add sake yeast during fermentation, bodaimoto relies on naturally occurring yeast. It's a method that largely went extinct in the early 1900s, but Gozenshu Brewery has worked hard to bring it back. And it's what Maiko says makes the sake here taste savory.
それをすることによって独特の風味であったりとか奥深い味わいとかそういったものが出せます。あれはもう夢のような味です。
It starts with special rice water, rich with lactic acid. This chemical kills off harmful fungus and creates the perfect environment for yeast to grow. Then workers add steamed rice and some of the koji rice to make the yeast starter called shubo. Then it's time for fermentation. Over 3 weeks, Michael adds more water, koji rice, and steamed rice to the mix. The yeast from the shubor will convert the sugars into alcohol. Maintaining a consistent temperature is critical at this stage, as sake can ferment only between 0 and 12 degrees Celsius. So, Michael and her team check the temperature twice a day. She knows the mash is ready when it begins to smell fruity. The mash is then pressed and filtered through this machine.
フィルターのようなものにそのもろみを通して透明になった液体、お酒とあと酒粕に分けていきます。
But before the sake can hit the shelves, Michael takes samples to her lab for analysis. Here she tests for acidity and alcohol levels right after fermentation.
その作ったお酒をお客さんが飲んでくれて美味しいと言ってくれた時に、この仕事をやってよかったなと思います。
The art of turning rice into alcohol dates back 7,000 years to ancient China. It came to Japan in the 3rd century BC. At first, Japan's imperial court made and regulated sake. Only officials and religious leaders could drink it. But the fall of the imperial court in the 12th century made the drink more accessible. By the 17th century, there were more than 27,000 brewers across Japan. The sake industry's peak came in the 1970s when machines and factories allowed for mass production of the drink. But demand for sake has dropped as Japan's aging population drinks less, and younger people opt for other beverages like beer and wine. From 1973 to 2022, yearly domestic sake sales fell by 76%.
日本酒業界自体が今落ち込んでるので、
Michael and her team produce 20 different sakes here. She says it's been difficult competing with cheaper breweries for a piece of the market. Traditionally, sake is made with only water, rice, koji, and yeast. But rice shortages during World War II caused many breweries to add alcohol to increase their yield and sugar to enhance the flavour. Today, Michael says cheap sake has taken over the market.
安いお酒を作ったりしたんですけど、やっぱりそれは本物のお酒ではないんですけど。
While the average bottle of sake ranges from $7 to $34, Gozenshu's premium sake can cost up to $200. Michael says most people can't taste the difference between the high-quality drink and ones with additives. Meanwhile, artisanal brewers like her have found it hard to keep up.
値段の競争をしてもうちには勝ち目がないので、
Michael decided the best way to survive was to keep her focus on quality and tradition.
きちんと本物のお酒を作ればそれを分かってくれる人が買ってくださるので。
Slowly, she's seen more and more customers looking for her sake, and today, 10% of her sales come from buyers abroad. And she's not the only brewer experiencing this. While demand for sake has been dropping in Japan, it's growing in other markets like the US, Europe, and other Asian countries. In 2022, Japan's sake export sales surpassed $300 million, reaching a record high for the 13th year in a row.
例えば海外の方に飲んでいただいたりとか、あとは若い方の中でも日本酒に興味を持っている人がいるので、そういう方が本当に業界としては希望の光というか。
Local bar owner Koji Soda says Michael's sake has also become a favorite among his customers.
複雑な香りと旨味でキレもあって、でまた僕自身の、一番好きなお酒。
そうです。やはりその他の日本酒よりも特に和食に合うことと、
どんどんこうさっぱりとしてくる、お料理と相性がいいから、お料理の味も引き立ててくれて、日本酒感もちゃんとある、ちょうどいいお酒だと思います。
水のように飲めるんで、それぐらい美味しいかなと思って。
Koji hopes more people will appreciate the importance of sake to Japan's culture.
ロンドンで世界の人たちに感じてもらいたいなと思っています。うちのお店では、お店が続く限り日本酒は取り扱い続けると思います。
Michael's sake has also received recognition across the country. In 2022, the brewery's best seller, Mimasaka, won first place at a sake fair in Japan.
ちょっと泣きそうになりました。嬉しかったです。
While she does not know what the future holds, she is determined to keep the legacy of traditional sake alive.
日本酒の業界が廃れてしまうと、日本の農業も廃れてしまうし、日本の食文化も廃れてしまうので。
Under this film of mud is one of the rarest marbles in the world. Grand Antique marble, known for its striking black colour and white veins, can be found in only one quarry. And its location was lost for over 70 years, until this man set out in a kayak to find it. But today, the quarrymen have run into a problem. They're struggling to extract this block of Grand Antique, valued at almost $150,000.
Bon, je suis très stressé aujourd'hui. Ça passe pas, le travail ne se passe pas comme il faut. On a beaucoup de problèmes pour basculer cette banque. C'est une mauvaise journée, una brutta giornata.
Every piece is precious because Grand Antique marble can sell for nearly $2,000 per square metre. That's about 20 times the price of run-of-the-mill Carrara marble. So why is Grand Antique marble so expensive? And will Giorgio and his team be able to extract the block they need in one piece? In a quiet corner of France's Pyrénées Mountains, quarrymen are preparing to extract Grand Antique marble.
Moi, je suis carrier, donc comme tous les carriers, quand on sort le bloc, on le touche comme pour avoir vraiment la sensation de la relation entre moi et le marbre, comme on caresse une femme, par exemple. C'est le même sentiment à peu près.
Grand Antique is an ancient marble formed at least 66 million years ago, when a tectonic plate collision broke black limestone, which was then filled with white calcite. Due to this rich contrast between black and white, Grand Antique has been in demand among the elite since antiquity. The Romans quarried the marble from the Pyrenees for centuries, and over 1,000 years later, it was used in St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, as well as Joseph Napoleon's tomb.
Donc là, c'est le petit pont qui servait à évacuer les blocs de la carrière dans une époque qui n'avait pas les machines d'aujourd'hui. Ils mettaient des blocs sur des chariots tirés par des veaux et passaient par là.
But quarrying this marble ground to a halt nearly 70 years ago, and knowledge of its location was lost. In 2012, Giorgio Rivieri, a third-generation quarryman from Italy, vowed to locate it.
J'ai dit, elle n'est pas disparue, la carrière, ça reste. Il faut voir à moins qu'est-ce que ça reste de cette carrière.
He borrowed a friend's kayak and, with some family members, journeyed into the wild to where he suspected the quarry was. When Giorgio found the quarry, it was in disrepair.
On n'a jamais su pourquoi ça a été abandonné. À mon avis, à l'époque, ils n'arrivaient pas à gérer l'eau quand il pleuvait beaucoup. Avec les pompes, les machines qu'ils avaient à l'époque, ils n'arrivaient plus à gérer l'eau. Nous, aujourd'hui, l'hiver, on est en difficulté, même avec les pompes qu'on a, on est en difficulté à gérer l'eau. Donc, je crois qu'à l'époque, ils ont décidé d'abandonner.
Giorgio went straight to work. He got a permit to drain the water and remove only the necessary vegetation. Then he purchased operating rights and officially opened the quarry at the end of 2014, reintroducing Grand Antique to the market. Today, Giorgio and his team have selected a high-grade block they believe could sell for almost $150,000. But extracting it is proving anything but simple. Normally, workers tuck large rocks and metal cushions between the block and the mountain. Then, using excavators, they try to tilt the marble gently to dislodge it. But today, things aren't going to plan. Every unsuccessful push breaks the precious marble, but it still won't topple.
On a des matériaux très prestigieux, mais à la fin, c'est très difficile aussi de les extraire.
Giorgio extracts only when he receives an order from a customer, so a day like today affects his bottom line.
La productivité, c'est moins de zéro. On est à moins aujourd'hui. Et c'est comme ça. C'est la difficulté de ce type de carrière.
As is the case with all the marble he extracts, Giorgio anticipates that half will break off when it hits the ground. This waste is written into the price, but since he only quarries a limited quantity, it's crucial that the other 50% is top quality. If it is, Giorgio can charge full price. Giorgio's permit limits him to extracting 1,200 metric tons of marble a year, because small quarries like this would run out of marble if they were overexploited. But he says he never reaches that amount for another reason.
Maintenant, on va faire beaucoup de production, on va diminuer les prix, et c'est pas notre intention.
It's a concept called artificial scarcity, something other luxury industries rely on. Take fashion brands like Nike or Supreme. Instead of simply producing more of a certain item to meet demand, they create limited editions. This boosts hype and price not only for the specific item, but for the brand's products overall. This year, the quarry produced 850 metric tons of marble, 350 short of what it could have extracted. Beyond supply and demand, the price of a slab of Grand Antique marble comes down to two main considerations: its size and the quality of its pattern. The priciest blocks have an even balance between white and black. If the marble is too black or too white, it loses value. These particular blocks were purchased at the highest price point by luxury brands, so Giorgio is paying special attention to the patterns. If the colour balance isn't worthy of the highest price point, the team cuts it into smaller blocks with more impressive veining.
David, ça sera, il faudra refaire encore le coupe là. Ça c'est pas trop intéressant. Donc il faut essayer 20 cm. On regarde de ce côté. Ici ça rentre encore un peu plus la tâche.
They'll make less money from a smaller block, but the quality control is essential to maintaining Grand Antique's premium reputation.
On travaille avec la nature, on peut avoir un joli front qu'on le voit d'avant, derrière ça peut avoir un défaut qu'on ne le prévoit pas, donc ça change un peu tous les prévisions.
Giorgio's main markets are the United States and China. He says American buyers prefer large, high-grade blocks. Chinese buyers, on the other hand, are happy to order smaller pieces. But he also sells small quantities to locals, like Jean-Jacques, a sculptor. Today, Jean-Jacques is selecting a Grand Antique block for a sculpture for his son.
Et quelle typologie de bloc vous désirez? Un bloc plutôt Veine blanc et noir, plutôt linéaire.
Plutôt linéaire, oui. Plutôt linéaire et plutôt en hauteur.
Plutôt serré mais
ouais,
longue.
Voilà, plus haut que large.
Ok,
ouais.
ok. Donc ça, on le choisira ensemble. Ça, c'est le matériau qu'on recherche. C'est le vrai grand antique. C'est la qualité top de cette carrière. Et bon, c'est la qualité qui a la plus de demande.
Ouais,
But Jean-Jacques ends up selecting a different piece, a narrow but thick block with linear veining.
Après, si tu choisis celle-là, je te fais un bon prix. Hein, c'est un bon prix. Mais c'est le bloc bon pour toi, ça.
Oui, pas un prix touriste.
Pas un prix touriste, c'est un prix d'artiste.
Another one of Giorgio's local clients is Xavier Marquier, who runs La Maison des Cailloux, a workshop in Cap-Vert, France, that creates marble products.
Oui, alors quand on arrive avec des matériaux comme le grand antique, qui est un matériau historique français, de suite, le client est sensible à cet argument et il sait qu'il achète un petit bout d'histoire de France.
The workshop specializes in Pyrénées marble.
Alors dans le grand antique particulièrement, on recherche une homogénéité des veinages. Si on se retrouve avec une grosse poche noire dans un côté ou si vraiment le bloc est disparate, ça ne va pas être très joli à la mise en œuvre.
This grand antique fireplace panel is nearly complete. The edges have been carved to the client's specifications, and it just needs some cleaning up and polishing. La Maison des Cailloux products can cost as much as $31,620 per cubic metre, with the higher end reserved for the best quality grand antique. That's partly because Xavier can't use all the marble he buys from Giorgio.
Mais entre les deux, il faut compter la perte de sillage, il faut compter les temps de mise en œuvre, d'usinage. Donc oui, effectivement, ça peut paraître cher comme ça, mais ça reste des prix qui sont assez corrects. Et puis,
And while he wouldn't mind if it was cheaper, Xavier understands Giorgio's limited extraction strategy, especially because overproduction can risk the future of the quarry.
on ne sait jamais ce qu'il y a derrière. Quand on descend chaque niveau, quand on ouvre, on élargit la carrière, on peut tomber sur une faille, une fissure, un changement de couleur tout simplement. Ça peut signifier la fin de l'exploitation.
Losing access to grand antique would be a true tragedy for Xavier because he says his work gives him a sense of purpose.
C'est intéressant de prendre la suite de ces gens-là qui ont travaillé dans ces carrières et aujourd'hui à nous de construire les châteaux modernes de nos générations futures du XXIe siècle, on va dire.
Back at the quarry, Giorgio and his team have returned their attention to the problematic block. They've changed their strategy, adding hydraulic pistons to the mix. And 2 days later, their work has paid off. With one final push, the block is free. But the result isn't ideal. Only 20% of this 140 metric ton grand antique block can be sold as premium marble.
Donc la quille elle est tombée, après 3 jours de travail très difficile et très dur. Le rendement il était ici là, à voir comme ça un peu difficile. Ça c'est un petit morceau qui vient de cette banque. Donc on va bien sélectionner après dans les gros blocs le blanc et noir. Ça sera de très bonne qualité.
In the end, he was able to sell this block for $65,000, less than half of what he'd hoped for.
La demande pour le grand antique, on a eu les 2-3 années arrière qu'elle était bien plus forte que cette année. Cette année, on a eu un arrêt pas mal. Depuis le mois de janvier, le marché s'est bien bloqué.
While workshops like La Maison des Cailloux intend to keep buying and selling grand antique, the market for the marble does fluctuate. But Giorgio and Xavier think that regardless of fluctuations in supply or demand, Grand Antique will always be a luxury marble.
C'est vraiment juste une merveille, quoi. Le veinage est vraiment approprié à cet esprit de grandeur.